It is before sunrise, but the sky has long been stained a bruised purple hue, promising another sweltering day. You wake on a thin straw mattress, stiff and damp, laid directly atop a dirt floor. Your hovel, a single room of roughly 10 by 10 feet, is squeezed between two half-timbered houses collapsing inward like tired old men. Outside your single shutterless window, wooden gutters drip yesterday's rainwater into a festering pit that smells of rot and sour ale. You sit up, massaging the cramps in your back and arms from sleeping on straw and bone hardwood. You tug at clothes that are more patches than fabric, rough-spun wool tunic with holes at the elbows, linen shirt stiff as cardboard, and hose riddled with moth-eaten gaps. You tighten the rope belt at your waist, the only thing keeping your trousers from falling to your ankles. Morning chores beckon, but you pause to steady your stomach's acidic churn, the result of last night's thin gruel and the sour dregs of ale unfit for sale. A rat scrabbles behind the mattress. It emits a sharp squeal and darts away, vanishing into the black crack between floorboards. Rats reign supreme here. Their teeth gnaw through leather pouches, their long tails whisk away scraps of stale bread, and their fleas carry every disease that can kill. You keep your few belongings, a rusted knife, a wooden bowl, a pair of wooden clogs, stacked in a corner under a rat's nest that you've learned to ignore. The dawn bell rings from the nearby monastery, but its chime is muffled by the clatter of carts on cobblestones and the wail of a newborn child somewhere down the street. You step outside and are immediately assaulted by the city's signature odor, a rancid cocktail of human waste, animal dung, rotting fish, and unwashed bodies. The open gutters running along each side of the narrow lane are cesspools, their foul liquid a staging ground for flies that hum in the morning air. Every few feet, you step over piles of excrement, men's, women's, animals, left to bake in the sun until nightfall. Beside you, a pig snuffles through the muck, lifting bits of half-rotten vegetables and spoiled meat toward its open snout. A farmer has tethered it to a short wooden stake in front of his hovel. It inks loudly as you pass, a protest at being woken so early. Across the street, a lean mongrel dog scampers after the pig, hoping the brute knocks loose a chunk of offal. The dog's ribs show through its mangy fur, another city dweller on the brink of starvation. You join the throng moving toward the central market square. The crowd is thick. Women carrying wicker baskets, men dragging wooden wheelbarrows, children herding scrawny goats on ropes. The tall merchants' houses loom overhead, 3 or 4 stories high, their upper floors jutting out so drastically that they almost touch across the narrow street. Dark wooden beams that support these overhangs are blackened by soot from the hearths, and the plaster between them peels away like dead skin. Every window spills dim candlelight into the alley, a feeble attempt at illumination. A bellows man in threadbare clothes hangs outside a metalworker's stall, blowing hot air onto glowing iron. The clang of hammer against anvil echoes through the lanes, mingling with storks' cries from rooftop nests and the cooing of pigeons. Sparks leap forth, and you shield your eyes from the shower of orange embers. The metalworker's apprentice, no more than a boy of 10, stands nearby, his face streaked with soot. He grips a metal rod still warm enough to blister his fingers. Further on, you encounter the tanner's yard. A low wooden fence encloses vats of urine and lime. Hides soak in these vile liquids to strip away hair and flesh, a process so pungent it drives some people to vomit. The laborers here, burly men in leather aprons, stir the boiling vats with long poles. Their hands and forearms are caked in stinking muck. You quicken your pace to escape the stench, but the smell clings to your nostrils like a curse. At the heart of the city stands the market square, a sprawling cobblestone arena ringed with stalls and booths. By dawn, it is already teeming. A fishmonger spreads gutted herring on a mossy table. Flies land and take off in hypnotic waves. A baker offers yesterday's coarse brown bread for half price, his hands bare as he tears lumps from a dough-stiff loaf. A spice trader from the Levant sits cross-legged beneath a canopy, selling peppercorns, cinnamon bark, and dried rue, luxuries that few here can afford. At his feet, a cat patrols the shadows, eyes glowing, ready to snatch any rat daring to cross the marketplace threshold. You thread your way through the crowd toward the communal well, one of the few sources of fresh water. A dozen people jostle around its stone rim, dipping buckets and jugs into watery gloom. You lower your own wooden bucket, bracing yourself against the elbows of impatient neighbors. When the bucket surfaces, you look inside. The water is gray, flecked with bits of straw and insect wings. You curse under your breath and bring it to your lips. The cold liquid slides down your throat, gritty with silt but mercifully clean of the darker things you've seen washed into the gutters. As the sun climbs higher, the heat intensifies. You set down the bucket and approach a vendor selling ale by the jug. The brew is more like sour vinegar than beer, brown, cloudy, and fizzing with gas. Still, it's safer than the water. You pay the price of 3 pennies, hand over a stained cloth purse, and clink the pewter jug to your lips. The tart, acidic taste burns your tongue and makes your eyes water. But you swallow greedily. The city's air has already parched your throat. You fill your wooden bowl with a ladle of thin pottage, a watery stew of split peas and leeks, and eat it standing. The bowl's warmth fights the morning chill that seeps through your threadbare tunic. Around you, the air is alive with shouts. A fishmonger hawks fresh cod. Fresh cod. A leatherworker bellows fine belts for fine ladies. A town crier rings a bell and proclaims news of a tax hike from the burghers. Every sound is harsh, unmelodic. There is no harmony here, only cacophony. You, for the sake of work, have to report to the local brewery. You labor there as a porter, hauling sacks of malted barley from cart to cellar. The job pays a few pennies a day, barely enough to afford bread and ale. As you leave the market, you pass beneath an archway etched with the town's emblem, a lion rampant clutching a sheaf of wheat. It is meant to inspire pride in the townsfolk, but for you it is a bitter reminder of your place in this world. Beneath the arch, the temperature drops as shadows gather. A wooden staircase leads to a trapdoor in the brewery ceiling. You climb laboriously, each step coated with a slick of spilled ale and barley husks. You push aside the trapdoor and slide down a rope ladder into the darkness below. The cellar is dimly lit by a single lantern. Stacks of clay jugs line the walls, embossed with the brewer's crest. The air here smells of damp straw, yeast, and stale beer, a heady aroma compared to the city outside. Your first task is to spread straw on the cellar floor. Soon, a massive vat will be filled with warm wort, and the fermentation process will produce heat and carbon dioxide. You kneel and break apart bundles of straw with your bare hands. Splinters dig into your palms, and you grit your teeth against the pain. A fellow porter elbows you aside, grumbling in a tongue you barely understand. He smears sweat across his forehead, channels dripping down his back. You grit your teeth and continue working, knowing that to linger is to risk being beaten by the brewmaster's whip. A distant rumble echoes as the massive wooden door swings open at street level. Cooler air gusts into the cellar, carrying the distant caw of ravens. You pause and listen. No bells of warning sound, no shouts of riot. But you know better than to be lulled. In this city, disaster can strike at any moment. Fire, plague, or bandit raid. As your arms tire, you recall the morning prayer you murmured before leaving your hovel. Saint Sebastian, protect us from pestilence. Saint Florian, shield us from fire. You don't know if the saints hear you, but you cling to the comfort of prayer like a talisman. In a world where danger is woven into the very air you breathe, faith is often the only refuge. Outside, the sun now glares through the narrow window, casting slanted beams that illuminate drifting dust motes. You rise from the straw, your knees stiff and aching. Sweat beads along your hairline. You think of the day ahead, stacking barrels, cleaning spilled wort, dodging the brewer's fretful temper. In exchange, you'll earn a handful of pennies, enough for more pottage, another jug of sour ale, and perhaps a crust of stale bread. As you ascend the ladder back into the morning light, you brace yourself for the return to surface horrors, the animal braise, the carrion stench, the cries of market vendors, and the swarm of flies. But for now, in the shadowed cellar, you savor the faint sweetness of fermentation drifting from the vats, an odd comfort in an otherwise miserable world. And so your day truly begins, under the unyielding yoke of filth, stench, and sickness, an existence measured not in moments of joy, but in intervals between suffering. Morning light slants through the brewery's open doors as you push aside the heavy oaken trapdoor and climb into the narrow alley once more. Your limbs ache, muscles stiff from yesterday's labor and the hours you spent crouched over straw in the damp cellar. There is no rest here. The city demands constant toil in exchange for its meager rewards. You head toward the linen weaver's workshop, where you are paid a few extra pennies for odd jobs, carrying bales of flax, sweeping wool fibers from the floor, fetching water for the dyers. You push open the crooked door and enter a world saturated in muted colors. Skeins of thread hang from wooden beams, and half-finished cloth lies draped over low work tables. The air smells of damp flax and tangy urine. Raw materials have been steeped in stale urine to break down the fibers, a necessary but foul-smelling step in turning plant stock into thread. A burly weaver named Hrothgar nods curtly as you set down the basket of barley husks you've repurposed as packing material. He gestures toward a stack of freshly woven linen, fine white cloth destined for the Lord's wife, or so the workshop's master claims. You heft the bolts onto your shoulder and trudge outside, the weight of the cloth pressing into your sore back. On the street, women line up with empty pitchers beside a narrow open drain carved into the stone curb. This is the town's latrine run, a primitive sewer channel where waste from privies higher up is swept into the street. Twice a day, workers dump night buckets, wooden pails that collect human excrement, from the upper floors of buildings directly into the gutter below. You cringe at the practice but cannot avert your gaze. The liquid torrent carries away solids in a putrid stream that attracts swarms of flies. Some residents throw ashes or lime into the run to mask the stench, but these attempts at deodorizing only stir the filth into foul clouds of dust. You set down your load of linen across the street from a public house. The inn sign, a faded painted shield with crossed malt scoops, sways in the breeze. Inside, the common room is strewn with broken wooden stools and tables scarred by heavy mugs. A hearth fire crackles dimly in the wall. Its smoke curls through a hole in the center of the low-beamed ceiling, coating everything with a fine layer of soot. You wait behind a row of burly laborers, each craving a pint of ale before embarking on his next drudgery. When your turn comes, you grip the cold pewter mug and receive enough sour ale to fill half its volume. You hand the mug to the alewife, an elderly woman whose hair is matted with lichen-colored fungus from damp, and she prods the head of the foaming brew aside with a crooked finger before wiping the rim with a rag that has seen decades of service. You pay a penny and retreat to a corner stool. You sip gratefully, the ales by burning your gullet, but promising a small numbing comfort before the afternoon's labors. The pub's common room serves as a crossroads of the city's underbelly. A gambler's dice clatter against the table. A pickpocket flits through the crowd, deft fingers seeking purses. A barmaid recites the latest rumor, 2 bodies discovered near the cathedral. Victims of the rat-borne plague that has stalked the city in fits for 5 years. Even in frivolous tavern chatter, the shadow of death persists. You finish your ale and set out again, this time carrying a heavy yoke across your shoulders. From each end dangles a bucket, one filled with fresh water from the well, the other with a rough mixture of wood ash and animal fat, soap paste for washing clothes. Your destination is the washerwoman's yard near the river. You trudge along narrow lanes, carefully avoiding cowpats and open cesspits, though avoidance is seldom possible. At the washerwoman's yard, a dozen women knee-deep in water knead archives of stained linens against rounded stones. The river water here is clearer, but still teems with silt and unseen microbes. You lower the soap bucket, and a stout woman named Godiva warns you to be careful not to let the soap slip into the water. Too much fat can foul the current and draw the attention of the miller, who will fine you for interfering with his wheel's operation downstream. You dump small scoops of paste into a wooden trough, then grab an armful of soiled cloth. The work is relentless. You pound the linen until calluses form on your knuckles, then dunk it in the cold flow and wring it out, drop it onto the sun-warmed grass, and repeat. Weeks-old sweat, blood from torn fingertips, the grease from door hinges, all these stains stubbornly cling to the fibers. You grunt as your arms ache, drying rapidly in the late morning sun. Around you, women gossip of children lost to dysentery last month, of merchant ships turned away because the plague flag hovered over this port. At midday, you collapse onto a patch of grass with your share of washed linen, clean enough to fetch a few more pennies from the merchants who buy laundry services. You eat your lunch, a loaf of coarse rye bread, crumbly and dark, and a handful of dried herrings traded earlier for ale tokens. You wash it down with water from your bucket, gritty and gray but mercifully unimpaired by the soap. A sudden cry rips through the yard. A girl of 10 clutches her chest and collapses beside the riverbank. She gasps and twists, foam flecking her lips. The washerwomen recoil in horror. It is the 3rd such incident this month. They scramble to drag her onto the grass, dabbing her with vinegar-soaked cloths to staunch the choking cough. You approach hesitantly, but a woman scoffs at your help. Stay back. The sickness spreads faster than a bay horse. Best not be too close. Shaken, you gather your buckets and lumber away. You take a roundabout route back to the brewery, skirting the riverbank to avoid the panicked crowds gathering around the collapsed child. The water looks darker here, as if particles of disease itself float just beneath the surface. You cross a wooden plank bridge, its timbers slick with moss and urine runoff. Below, dark shapes swirl in the current, discarded animal carcasses, broken wooden barrels, and occasionally, a stray leather sandal. Back at the brewery, your next task is to empty the dregs from yesterday's fermentation into a nearby pit. Your foreman, a stout man with a red pock-scarred face, hands you a wooden shovel. He grunts and orders you to hurry. The pit must be covered before evening or the stench will drive away customers. You shovel glutinous sludge, spent grains, dead yeast cells, and acidic liquids into the pit. Each eve sends a wave of rancid vapors into your face. You gag, but continue, aware that a slow pace will earn you lashings from the brewmaster's whip. Sweat mingles with the sludge, caking your tunic and clinging to your skin. After what seems like hours, you finish the job and scatter fresh straw over the pit before tamping it down with foot and shovel. By late afternoon, fatigue has set in. Your back protests each movement. Your head throbs from the constant assault on your senses. But the city's needs never pause. There are always vats to be filled, buckets to be fetched, linen to be pressed, and gutters to be cleaned. At dusk, you hear the tolling death bell from the church steeple, one long, sonorous clang for each person claimed by illness in the last 24 hours. Tonight, there have been 9. You pause in the alley, head bowed. The pavement beneath your feet is slick with rainwater and human blood from an earlier street fight. You press your hands to your eyes, longing for relief from the day's toils. A procession of hooded clerics shuffles by, carrying candles and chanting psalms for the dead. You watch from the shadows as they lay simple wooden crosses on the cobblestones, each marking a victim's last known location. There is no funeral pyre for these commoners. Their bodies will be cast into a mass grave beyond the city wall at dawn. Nightfall brings no reprieve. The air grows heavy with humidity, and no breeze stirs to carry away the odors. You head back to your hovel, bones weary. Outside your door, the rats are already at work, gnawing scraps off the pile of refuse you left near the gutter. You frighten one away with a kick. It squeals and scurries off, disappointed. Inside, you relight a taper, your only form of nighttime illumination. The weak flame casts jittery shadows on the walls, revealing the scrawled prayer etched above your sleeping pallet. God, deliver us from this vale of tears. You kneel and say a brief prayer, offering thanks merely for another day survived. Before lying down, you strip off your tunic and hose, laying them in a corner to air. They still carry the scent of sweat, ash, and mildew. You clamber onto your straw mattress, feeling the coarseness of the stalks press into your shoulders. As you close your eyes, you can still taste the acrid tang of wood ash in the laundry yard, feel the slick sludge of the brewery pit on your palms, and hear the lambent creak of the water wheel at the mill. The city's nocturnal symphony unfolds outside, dogs barking at shadows, rats scuttling along the walls, and distant wails of the sick. You pull a threadbare blanket over your body and shiver, not from cold, but from the weight of another day's horrors. Tomorrow will be the same. More work, more filth, more fear. And if you grow ill, there will be no physician's care, only the crude remedies of a barber surgeon with a cleaver and a handful of leeches. In this city, survival is an unending struggle against the very elements of life. Water that brings disease, air that carries miasmas, food that teeters between nourishment and poisoning. Here, you exist on the razor's edge between the living and the dead, with each sunrise renewing the cycle of suffering. As sleep finally pulls you under, you cling to the faint hope that the dawn will bring a break in the plague, a merciful twist of fate. But deep down, you know better. In a world built on filth, stench, and sickness, hope is a fragile thing easily crushed by a single rat bite or a cup of tainted water. And so you rest, if only for a few hours, bracing yourself for the relentless grind of the next day. Before the first light of dawn, an acrid smoke curls through the narrow lanes of the city, twisting in spirals between overhanging timbered balconies. You wake at once, your heart hammering against your ribs. Flames flicker beyond the jagged horizon of rooftops, an inferno devouring the poor thatched houses clustered close together like prisoners in a cell. You throw off the threadbare blanket and spring from your straw pallet, adrenaline searing through your bones. You stumble into the alley and perceive the full horror. The house across the street, a 2-story hovel with a shop on the ground floor, is engulfed. Black smoke bellows from beneath the eaves, and roaring tongues of fire lick at the wooden beams. Sparks drift skyward like malevolent fireflies, threatening to ignite the tinder-dry facades of adjacent homes. Panicked shouts ricochet off the walls as neighbors emerge in nightclothes, clutching children and bundles of meager possessions. No one sounds an alarm, no bells toll to warn the city. There is no organized fire brigade, no leather buckets chained to a communal pump, no water carts on standby. Instead, residents grab whatever vessels they can, pots, mugs, buckets, and line up at the nearest well or cistern. You join them, hands trembling, and lower your bucket into the brackish water. A child at the front of the line sobs into its mother's skirts. You lift the heavy bucket and hurry back to the blaze, flinching as the heat sears your face. Several neighbors have formed a human chain, passing buckets along a living rope. But the fire is voracious. Each volley of water dissipates into steam that only momentarily stifles the flames. A man throws down his bucket and wrenches at the wall, attempting to break a hole for better access, but the scorching heat makes him recoil. You step aside as collapsing beams crash to the cobbles, sending shards of ember scattering across the lane. There is screaming now, a woman's shrill cry as she realizes her husband is still trapped inside. In desperation, a mason hurls a heavy hammer against the locked door. The wood splinters but does not give. You glimpse the silhouette of a child pressed against a window pane, mouth agape, eyes wide with terror. Another spark lands on the thatch of the neighboring house, and you hear the crackle as flames take hold. Gasps of horror ripple through the crowd. Mothers clutch infants. Old men sputter curses to the saints above. Youths ready sharpened stakes, as if hoping to prod the blaze into submission. After what feels like an eternity, the roof of the burning house collapses in a thunderous roar, spraying a fountain of sparks. The ground trembles. Bricks from the chimney tumble down, narrowly missing those still fighting the fire. Someone shouts, "Run!" and the human bucket line breaks as people scatter for their lives. You flee down a side alley, coughing, panicked, your lungs burning with smoke. By the time the flames die down, the house is reduced to a smoldering ruin. Neighbors stand in stunned silence, staring at the charred timbers and ash. 2 children's toys, a wooden hoop, and a battered doll, lie half buried in the debris. A stray cat wanders among the ashes, its fur singed. No city guard arrives to usher survivors away or to investigate the cause. No magistrate orders the demolition of ruined walls to prevent spread. The only relief comes from the rising sun, which illuminates the blackened street with a cruel, indifferent light. You return to your hovel, shaken and again soaked in sweat and ash. Today, you must continue to work, for to shirk your labor is to forfeit your pay and to starve. Yet each step feels heavier than the last, weighed down by the memory of innocent lives consumed in an instant. As daybreak fades into noon, the streets once again teem with life. But today life is a gauntlet. Crime coils through every corner like a viper ready to strike. There are no paved sidewalks, only rough stones that slope toward open drains. You crouch low as you navigate toward the tannery, carrying the precious hides you took hours to prepare. Each cobble is slick with rainwater and offal, and you cast furtive glances behind you. A trio of young cut purses lurks beneath a sagging archway. They lurk in the shadows, their eyes glinting as they watch the crowd. You tighten your grip on the leather bundles pressed against your chest. You know their tactics: the elbow to the ribs, the feigned stumble, the deft fingers sweeping into purses or pouches. Your life's earnings, barely a handful of pennies, rest in a small pouch at your belt. You duck into a side street and nearly bump into a city watchman. He is dressed in a patched coat the color of charcoal and wears a metal cap dented from abuse. He holds a short baton and a rusted chain. But the watchman's attention is on a street dog, which he is chasing down with drunken glee. You exhale a silent prayer that he fails to notice the glint of coins at your waist. The watchman seizes the dog and beats it senseless, cackling. The dog yelps and runs off, wounded. The watchman saunters away, satisfied. You press onto the tannery's back entrance, avoiding the main gate where a gang of armed brigands sometimes camp out, extorting passage tolls from traders. Today the gate stands guarded by 2 rogues dressed in leather jerkins, armed with daggers and cudgels. Their chests rise and fall with heavy breaths. When they see you approach, they step in your path. Leather hides for sale. One asks, his voice oily as swamp water. Indeed, you reply, forcing composure. 5 hides, freshly tanned. He grins, bearing a row of yellowed teeth. A fine price, he says. But you must pay the city toll first. You frown. There is no official toll set by the town council for hides. This is pure extortion. You glance down the alley. No watcher is near to enforce any tax. You know the alternatives: fight, flee, or pay. There are 2 stout yoke poles and buckets leaning against the tannery wall behind you. You could grab one, defend yourself, but they outnumber and outmuscle you. I'm a simple porter, you protest. My master would skin me. No, worse, if I paid any more than the set duty. He laughs, a bark that echoes off the walls. Your master to skin you, eh? Then consider your master a cat if he won't pay us. 5 pennies or we'll skin the hides ourselves. You feel the weight of those pennies in your pouch, a week's wages. You squeeze your eyes shut. There is no support here, no avenue for appeal. City watch is a farce. Justice is for those with gold or power. The poor must bend. With a trembling hand, you transfer the coins from your pouch into the brigand's calloused palm. He rakes the silver pieces into his sleeve and wedges them into a stash hidden beneath his jerkin. The other brigand cracks the butt of his dagger across your shoulder. You wince, but say nothing. A final warning. Don't return, porter. And they step aside. You hurry into the tannery yard, every breath a victory. Inside the tannery, the air hangs heavy with the stench of putrefaction and lime. You wheel the hides to the soaking vats, each step a cautious negotiation between ragged planks and slick puddles. As you work the cumbersome hide into the bubbling lye, you recall an incident a fortnight ago. And Garin the furrier, a man of some renown, was found beaten beside the river, his furs stolen, and his body left to drown at low tide. The City Watch discovered his corpse only when the tide rose and washed him onto a millstone. No one was ever punished. You finish your task in grim silence, mind burdened by the knowledge that everywhere you turn, violence waits. Pickpocketing, mugging, extortion, assault, these are the daily realities of those who cannot afford protection. Even the city gates at night remain unguarded. The watchmen retire to taverns to drink off their meager pay. You lock the tannery's door behind you and secure the bolt with a scrap of rope. It will do little to deter a determined thief, but it offers a sliver of solace. You make your way to the apothecary's shop, hoping to purchase a sprig of lavender or rosemary to mask the stink of tanning vats clinging to your clothes. The apothecary booth stands under a lean-to, its shelves crowded with wooden racks of clay jars labeled in fading Latin, salmoniac, tincture of myrrh, pulverized pumice. You pay a penny for a small bundle of dried herbs. The apothecary warns you to wrap them in cloth, lest their scent attract rats, or worse, pickpockets eager to snatch any merchant's wares. With the herbs tucked inside your tunic, you set off for home as dusk approaches. You navigate back streets to avoid the brigands at the main gate and slip through a narrow gap in the city wall, a makeshift breach that villagers and beggars used to come and go without paying tolls. Here, too, dangers lurk, wild dogs roam, and clergy occasionally send patrols to clear the undesirables. You keep your head bowed, cloak drawn, and hurry past broken stones and thorny brambles. As you re-enter the city near your quarter, you encounter a cluster of youths wrestling in the street. They are armed with wooden clubs and stones, their laughter raw and animalistic. You tighten your grip on your herbs as one boy lunges toward a passerby's pouch, missing by mere inches. The city guard, if they can be called such, arrives. 2 watchmen, their helmets dinted, their faces glum. They beat the youths into submission, trading blows that echo down the empty lane. When the youths lay still, the watchmen arrest one boy and drag him away by the hair, ignoring pleas from the boy's friends. There is no trial, no magistrate, no appeal. You resume your journey, stomach churning at the sight of blood on the cobbles. The watchmen disappear into the gloom, leaving the street to settle into silence. Night descends without warning. The city's sole illumination comes from pitiful tallow candles behind shuttered windows and the occasional torch carried by a patrolling cleric. You reach your hovel, rat-infested and leaky, and light your single taper. The herbs at your waist release a faint, calming aroma, an ephemeral shield against the city's stench. You remove your belt and hang the pouches with your money and herbs on a nail above your sleeping pallet, hoping to deter thieves. You eat a meager supper of cold pottage and stale bread, each bite a reminder that tomorrow will bring new dangers, the risk of fire, crime, and more ruthless extortion. You lie down and listen to the city's nocturnal symphony, the distant howl of wolves outside the walls, the scuffle of boots on flagstones, the crack of a wooden club, followed by a human cry. No one intervenes. No one offers comfort. In the Middle Ages, public safety is a myth for the poor. Fire can consume your home without notice. Thieves can strip you of your hard-earned coins. Watchmen can be as predatory as bandits. The city's walls may keep outsiders at bay, but they do nothing to protect those who live within. As you drift into a restless sleep, you clutch the herbs to your chest, your only talisman against a world gone mad. You pray that tomorrow's dawn brings not only the light of day, but also a miracle, that the city might learn to defend its weakest inhabitants, that law and order might plant roots in its muddy streets, and that you might survive another day in this universe of flames, felonies, and the failure of protection. And so you rest, fitfully, knowing that the greatest peril may not come from the plagues or famines, but from the society itself, fractured and indifferent to your suffering. The dawn of the next day arrives with a stillness unlike any you have known. No cocks crow, no merchants set out their wares, and the usual clamor of the market is absent. A pall of dread hangs over the city's narrow lanes, and invisible enemy stalks every household. Rumor has spread that the Black Death has reached your walls, carried by infected rats, fleas, or perhaps by ill-fated travelers arriving from across the sea. You awake to an eerie silence, broken only by the distant toll of the curfew bell. It is no longer a signal to rest, but a grim reminder, by order of the council, no one is to leave their home after sunset. The decree, scrawled in black ink on a scrap of parchment and nailed to every gate, warns that any who defy quarantine will face the lash or worse. You lie in your hovel, listening to your own heart hammering, and feel the walls closing in. There is no market today. The alewife's booth remains shuttered, and the tanner's vats lie motionless. You dare not venture outside until midday, by which time you must fetch water and check on your neighbors. As you step into the alley, the air feels thick and fetid. Smoke curls lazily from a distant chimney, perhaps a hidden hearth still daring to burn. Rats scurry underfoot, their beady eyes reflecting your terror. You hurry to the well with your bucket, careful to keep your threadbare hood drawn over your face. When you lower the bucket, it comes up coated in a greasy film of scum, an ominous reminder that disease lurks in every drop. You fill your wooden pail and carry it home, hurrying past closed doors and shuttered windows. Occasionally, you glimpse a neighbor's face peering through a small opening, eyes hollow, cheeks sunken, and their hands pressed against the wood as if begging for help. No one speaks. In fear of contagion, voices have gone silent. Back in your hovel, you set the bucket down and pace the floor. The Black Death strikes swiftly. A fever, agonizing aches, swollen lymph nodes, buboes in the groin or armpits, and black blotches on the skin where blood congeals. You have lost friends, Benedict the Cooper, whose throat seized overnight, Elsbeth the seamstress, who expired in her sleep, and young Owen, the brewer's apprentice, who begged for water until his lips turned blue. Their bodies were dragged out at dawn, wrapped in coarse sheets, and thrown into a mass pit beyond the city wall. No funeral rites, no prayers, only earth heaped in a pit, as though they were refuse. You kneel at your straw pallet and pray to Saint Roch and Saint Sebastian, the patrons against plague. You bite your lip, your mind racing with dread. You have no access to a physician. Physicians fled the city long ago. Instead, you rely on folk remedies. Juniper berries steeped in wine, poultices of mustard powder, vinegar-soaked cloths pressed against the buboes. But you know deep down these are empty gestures. In a world without germ theory, plagued by superstition, disease is an act of God, and only divine mercy can save you. Midday brings greater peril. The church bells peal in dissonant warning, summoning any able-bodied to carry the dead from doorsteps to carts. You peer through your doorway and see a wooden hearse, 2 large wheels, a plank deck piled with bodies, and a friar perched atop, ringing a small bell and chanting psalms for the departed. The procession moves slowly, the stench of decay drifting through the streets. Beggars trail behind, casting fearful glances, hoping for alms from those about to inherit property. Some say the plague spares no one, but others whisper that it favors the rich, harvesting the poor first. A fevered knock sounds at your door. You freeze, heart in your throat. A small boy stands on the threshold, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked cheeks. "Please," he pleads, "help my mother. She's sick." You clutch the doorframe. To aid him risks contagion. To refuse condemns a stranger to death. You push aside your fear and reach for your cloak. Clutching your wooden bowl, you follow the boy down a side alley to his hovel. Inside, the room is draped in shadows. A woman lies on a low pallet, her skin pallid and mottled. She moans in delirium, her breath rattling. Beside her sits a man, her husband, his eyes sunken, fist clenched. You offer water and a spoonful of juniper infusion. He dips her lips, and she swallows in a ragged gasp. You press a cloth soaked in vinegar to her temples and whisper prayers. The man's gratitude is raw, tears welling in his eyes. But you know this small mercy is unlikely to stem the tide of death. You leave the hovel shaken and hurry back to your own refuge. As you pass through the empty streets, you see makeshift barricades erected at intersections, planks nailed across archways, ropes sagging under the weight of decrees forbidding passage. Watchmen, a half-starved, half-deranged, prowl corners, eyes wild beneath furrowed brows. They demand to know where you have been, what you have touched, and whether you have any sickness. You lie through trembling lips. "I stayed home. Nothing to report." They eye you suspiciously and let you pass with a curt warning. In the afternoon, you hear a distant scream, a child's voice shrill with terror. You know immediately that the death carts are returning early. A fevered outbreak in the North Quarter has overwhelmed the carriers. Soon, the bells will toll without pause, each clang marking a fresh victim. You slump against a wall, feeling trembling hands slip toward panic. You force yourself to breathe deeply, counting to 10. In the distance, the church steeple's shadow creeps across the rooftops, a silent sentinel. Back in your hovel, you chalk a tally on the wooden beam above your pallet. 14. 14 days since the first plague case appeared among the porters at the docks. Each day, the number grows. You trace the lines with a finger and imagine each stroke as a life lost: a father, a mother, a child, a neighbor. There is no room for sentiment. Sorrow is a luxury in this city of death. As dusk falls, you dare not light your taper. To do so risks attracting watchmen, who might drag you out for a night burial if they suspect sickness. Instead, you sit in darkness, listening to the city's new nocturne, the measured roll of wagons, the wail of the dying, the soft thuds of bodies sliding onto wooden planks. The air vibrates with a terrible expectancy, as though the very stones are waiting for the next victim. Sleep is elusive. You dream of crawling through a field of corpses, each face frozen in terror. You awaken in a cold sweat, your hair matted, heart pounding. The morning brings no relief. The smell of decay has seeped into every crack of your mind. Yet life, for the living, must persist. You rise and prepare for another day of fetching water, distributing simple remedies, and supporting those too weak to care for themselves. You form a small band of survivors, porters, weavers, brewers, who hatchet out a routine: 2 at the well, 2 tending the sick, and 1 who remains armed at the door to ward off looters. It is a fragile alliance, held together by desperation. On the 5th day of your group's vigil, you find Thomas the carpenter collapsed in the street, his chest riddled with black pustules. You lift him onto a wooden plank and carry him to the makeshift infirmary in the granary, an empty barn once used for surplus grain. There, you and your companions lay him on hay bales and fan his forehead with a board. He gasps, eyes rolling back. Tell my wife I love her," he rasps, voice barely audible. You press your ear to his lips, but the words are lost to death's silence. A half hour later, he is gone. Thomas's body is placed on a cart with 4 others. His apprentice, barely more than a boy, stumbles behind, bawling. You catch his gaze and offer a sorrowful nod, the only comfort you can muster. The cart rumbles away, and the boy collapses against a fence, tears soaking his tunic. You turn away, fighting back your own despair. In the days that follow, the plague's grip weakens as swiftly as it tightened. Weather grows warmer, rats depart the warming adobe, fleas perish without hosts. By the 3rd week, the tally rate begins to slow. No one dares speak of hope, yet beneath the pall of morning, a flicker of relief emerges. By the end of the month, fewer bodies lie in the streets. The death carts cease their rounds. The curfew bell is silenced. Wooden barriers come down, and shuttered shops reopen. You step into the market for the first time in weeks and see familiar faces: the alewife polishing her mugs, the tanner stirring his vats, the fishmonger arranging cod on his table. All have aged under the strain of loss and fear, but they stand, unbowed, ready to rebuild. You return to your hovel and count your tally marks: 53. 53 lives lost, 53 families left broken. You scrape the lines from the beam with a nail, burying the memory in wood. Then, as if exorcising the specter of plague, you push open your door and step into the sunshine. The city will never be the same. Friends, neighbors, and strangers lie in unmarked graves beyond the wall. The social order has been upended. Survivors inherit property, laborers demand higher wages, and the specter of death has taught all that the poor deserve no less protection than the wealthy. In this new world, whispers of revolt stir among the serfs. A dawning sense of rights has emerged from the ashes. But for you, the memory remains. The rats squeal behind the mattress, the black ooze of pus from a plague bubo, the wails of the dying, and the ceaseless clamor of the death bell. You have survived where so many did not because you were stronger or holier, but because you clung to the smallest acts of mercy, fetching water for a stranger's mother, offering vinegar-soaked cloths, sharing the last crust of bread. As evening falls, you climb the ramparts beyond the city gate, gazing at the horizon painted in pink and gold. You breathe deeply, tasting clean air for the first time in weeks. The fields beyond the wall are silent, waiting for hands to plow, seeds to be sown, and life to return. You descend the steps and make your way home, aware that tomorrow you will wake to filth, stench, and sickness once more, though perhaps tempered by the lessons of plague. For now, you carry with you a simple truth: survival is not guaranteed by power or wealth, but by compassion, community, and the stubborn will to endure. You awake before the sun, to a sky that is still a bruised blue across the eastern fields. Through the cracks of your Waddle Daub cottage walls, a thin chill seeps in, making your breath mist in the dark. Your pallet, merely a few straw bundles tied together by coarse rope, presses uncomfortably against your back. You lie still for a moment, listening to the rhythmic bleating of sheep, the distant lowing of cows, and the muted crow of a rooster from the neighboring farmstead. Your wife has already risen. You hear her stirring the embers in the hearth, coaxing a flicker of orange glow from the damp wood. Before you even roll aside your ruff wool blanket, the familiar pang of hunger twists in your gut. Last night's barley porridge, thin and lumpy, provided barely enough warmth to dull your empty stomach. No honey or cheese remains to sweeten it. You slip from your pallet. Your joints crack like old planks as you stretch. You pull on a patched wool tunic. It seems half-mended with inept stitches, and hose so thin they've frayed to netting. Your leather belt, more rope than hide at this point, holds your breeches together, though you know it won't last the day. You step into a pair of hardened leather shoes, but the soles are worn thin. Cold earth seeps through the cracks, chilling your toes. At the hearth, your wife Lattice and your eldest daughter, Margaret, kneels on rough planks, stirring a pot of boiled grain. The meal is flavored with a handful of wild onion tops and the faintest trace of salt imported from the coast. Your son, Yosef, waits nearby in a similar state of half-nakedness, a single tunic threadbare at the elbows, hose missing one foot. Their hunger shines in their eyes. There is no extra ale for breakfast. The single cask reserved for the Lord's tithe must remain untouched. You bow your head and thank the saints for this meager blessing. Saint Winifred, guard our fields. Saint Isidore, shield our flocks, you murmur. Prayer costs nothing, though it often feels as empty as the pot's bottom. Lattice ladles porridge into 3 wooden bowls. You pass them around, each of you eating in silence, mindful of the squeak of floorboards or a stray crumb hitting the ground. Every sound a reminder of how precious sustenance is. By the time the sun peaks over the ridge, you've washed your bowl in a trough of cool spring water and scooped the sludge from the water's surface into a cloth for reuse. You tuck the cloth into your belt. It will serve as a rag for cleaning scythes and sickles later. You head out the door into the morning mist, grabbing a wooden ladle and an iron bucket to fetch water for the livestock. Your cottage stands at the edge of a 3-acre strip of land granted by the manor. You and a handful of other peasants cultivate scattered plots, hemmed in by hedgerows, in the dense forest beyond. These strips are not your own. They belong to the Lord, who holds them in trust. In return for usage, along with the seeds, tools, and occasional plow, you owe him labor, known as corvée or week work, and a portion of every harvest. Today, you must report to the manor's domain fields by mid-morning. But first, water. You trudge along a muddy lane, potted with hoof prints and cow patties, toward the stream where every peasant in the hamlet must share the draw. As you go, you pass the village blacksmith's workshop, where sparks fly like angry fireflies at dawn. The blacksmith's apprentice, a lanky youth, hammers horseshoes for the Lord's cavalry. Their work is more valued than yours. The clang of iron is a more desirable noise than the drone of scythe against grass. At the streamside, 3 women are already filling clay jugs. One, Etta the weaver, scolds her toddler for playing in the reeds. Water here is clearer than in the well, though still tinged with sediment from upstream plowing. But it is open to animals and wildlife, making disease a constant threat. You duck your bucket under the flow, fighting the urge to gag as debris drifts past. A discarded leather sandal, a rotten apple, the carcass of a small bird. You fill your bucket and lift it, the weight pulling you forward. The strap cuts into your palms despite their leather gloves. At the cottage yard, you tip the water into a trough for the sheep. They bleed hungrily, their fleeces matted and flecked with burrs. You repeat the process for the cows and pigs, each one watching with wet-nosed expectation. The hogs grunt happily as they snuffle up slops of leftover porridge you pour into their pen. With livestock tended, you hurry back inside to fetch your tools, the iron-headed mattock, a heavy spade, and a long-handled scythe with a wooden shaft nearly as tall as you are. You sling them over your shoulder and head toward the manor fields, a clearing of rich, dark soil set aside exclusively for the Lord's produce. The path to the domain field follows a low ridge overlooking the village. You pause to catch your breath and survey the landscape. Thatched cottages dot the patchwork of small holdings. Beyond them, the manor house stands on a gentle rise, its timber frame more robust, walls whitewashed, roof tiles intact. Smoke rises from its great hearth, a luxury you envy. You know the fields behind it are plowed by oxen, not by peasant backs. You and every serf will toil there for the next 4 hours at least, without pay, without mercy. You join 15 other serfs already assembled at the field's edge. The reeve, an aging peasant appointed by the Lord, stands by a wooden gate, his staff in hand. He wears a finer tunic than yours, though still of humble cloth. His face is lined with worry. Harvest was lean last season, and the Lord's patience is scant. Any shortfall in yield means increased levies next year. Morning, he calls curtly. Grab your scythes. We must mow the barley headland before the sun climbs any higher. The headland is the narrow strip that surrounds the main barley field. Its grain, a cheaper ale staple, must be harvested first. The rest of you will then plant winter wheat on the fallow ground, but only after the headland is cleared. You remove your scythe from its resting place, test its balance, and sling it onto your shoulder. The blade, though sharpened last week, is duller than you'd like. Wooden pegs in the handle are loose, and the grip is worn into a smooth sheen. You envy the Lord's scythes forged by the smith's finest hand, but your own are what you have. The day's work begins with a hollow thunk as scythe blades meet barley stalks. You swing your arm in a practiced arc, the sharp edge slicing through stalks at ground level. You kick the mown grain into small piles, ready for the binder to gather later. Your arm muscles burn within minutes. The heat of the sun intensifies the effort, and sweat soaks your tunic. Around you, the air is alive with the smell of cut grass and barley dust. Flies buzz in lazy circles, landing on sweat-damp skin. You wipe your brow on a sleeve and grit your teeth. Your daughter Margaret, barely 14, works beside you, swinging a smaller scythe. Her strokes are uneven, and a sunburn reddens her cheeks already. You shout encouragement, but words taste bitter on your tongue. You cannot afford a misgut row. Each drop stalk is a levy against your family's future. Within the first hour, a steady procession of carts arrives to haul the piled barley to the barn. The drivers are free tenants, peasants of slightly higher standing who paid a sum for their plots. They demand a penny per cartload, which they keep for themselves. You catch an irritated glance from the reeve, who reminds you that non-attendance will be reported to the steward. By mid-morning, your shoulders ache from the repetitive motion, and your back throbs from bending. The heap of barley headland shrinks slowly under the onslaught of your blade. Summer heat intensifies, dust particles swirl in the sunlight. You pause to take a draught from your water flask, cool, but gritty, and flex your fingers, already developing calluses. Nearby, one of the older serfs, Wilhelm, stumbles as his scythe catches a stone. He curses under his breath and presses a hand to his bruised leg. There is no medic or surgeon in the field, only folk remedies in villagers' hands. Poultices of plant and leaves, vinegar-soaked rags, splints made with straw and cloth. But in this moment, Wilhelm cannot seek relief. The headland must be finished. He swallows the pain and redoubles his effort. Halfway through the headland, the reeve calls a brief respite. You and the others assemble at a shaded oak copse bordering the field. Someone produces a round of rye bread and a hunk of goat cheese, shared equally, of course, though always in hopes that the steward never inspects your portion. The bread is coarse, full of husks, and tastes of dust. The cheese is sour and strings your teeth as you bite. You chew mechanically, eyes fixed on the manor barn in the distance, each beam of its sturdy roof mocking your fragile shelter. A child, no more than 6, sits beside the copse, clutching a wooden bowl. Tears streak down his face. He was sent to deliver water, but dropped the only flask, shattering it on a stone. His mother scolds him, but you reach into your pocket and slip him a small piece of bread. He shoots you a grateful look before scuttling away. You return to your bread, tracing a silent prayer for the child's future. The break is short-lived. The reeve announces, no more dalliance. Get back to work. You rise, every muscle protesting, and rejoin the line. The next 2 hours blur in a haze of sweat, dust, and monotonous arcs. As the sun reaches its zenith, the headland is finally laid bare. With the barley headland cleared, the reeve directs you to the fallow field for winter wheat sowing. The long-handled hoe feels like a torture device as you break clods of earth. Each swing must be precise. Too shallow, and the seed won't take. Too deep, and especially heavy soil will choke the grain. You fling handfuls of seed into the furrows, aiming for even spacing, but the unforgiving sun and your fading strength betray your efforts. By the time you finish the last furrow, your tunic is plastered to your skin, and your hose clings to your calves like a second skin. You lean on your hoe, breathing heavily, and realize you have not eaten or drunk since the meager breakfast hours ago. You hollow out a space in your belt and find the last piece of cheese from your daughter's ration, wrapped in cloth. You pop it into your mouth, and its dry saltiness becomes the sweetest thing you've tasted all day. Just as you swallow, a horn sounds from the manor house noon call. The reeve signals dismissal for the laborers. You exchange weary nods with fellow serfs and gather your tools. There will be no coin for this day's work, only the right to use your plot and the promise of your family's meager share of next season's yield. As you trudge back along the muddy lane toward home, you feel the weight of the morning's toil dragging at your steps. You pass the blacksmith again. The boy apprentice waves, sweat streaked across his face. You manage a weak smile in return. Near your cottage, your wife and children wait with a new round of thin gruel, flavored this time with a single onion skin boiled for color. You slump against the doorframe and accept a bowl. As you eat, you reflect on the morning's labor, 4 hours in the manor's service, an uncounted hour breaking soil, and 2 hours of scything. The sun is still high, and there is work yet to be done. Weeding the family plot, repairing the fence, collecting firewood before dusk. But for this moment, you sit at the edge of your door, savoring the warmth of being home and the hollow satisfaction of having earned the right to scratch out another day's survival. Outside, the midday sky gleams with promise, but you know that promise is empty. Your life is measured in musty harvests, onerous dues, and the unrelenting demands of those who hold all power. Yet still, at dawn, you will rise and serve again, because there is no other choice. The dawn light creeps through the cracks in your cottage wall, but there is no peace in waking. It brings only the knowledge that your life belongs not to you, but to the Lord whose name you dare not speak without trembling. Today is a week-work day, corvée, when every able-bodied peasant is summoned to toil in the domain for the Lord's direct benefit, unpaid and unremitting. You dress in the half-clean smock you earned from last season's flax harvest, the rough-woven fabric prickling your skin. Your hose, already frayed, buckle low around your hips. In the hearth's weak glow, you see your own gaunt reflection in the blackened iron pot. With stomach still hollow from yesterday's meager supper, you step outside into the cold air, joining the line of neighbors heading toward the manor's yard. A reeve stands beside the manor gate, a man once a serf himself, now elevated by his lord's favor but despised by his peers. He carries a staff topped with the lord's crest, a carved wheat sheaf. His sharp eyes skim the assembled peasants. When he spots an absent family, he marks their names on a ragged parchment. Absence is punished by extra days' labor or the confiscation of tools. You swallow nervous bile. Sickness or child-rearing excuses rarely find mercy. The manor's great yard is already crowded with peasants kneeling beside long rows of budding fruit trees. Today's task: spading, weeding, and applying thin layers of manure. These orchards, reserved for the Lord's private table, must bear bounty, or the Lord's wrath will be swift. You kneel beside a young apple tree, its branches just uncurling from winter's slumber. With stiff fingers, you grasp the long-handled spade and thrust the blade into the hard-packed earth. The soil, cold and heavy, resists. You dig, heaving clods aside, rooting out tufts of grass, then scoop handfuls of foul-smelling manure collected from the stables around the tree's base. The stench is rank: ammonia, half-rotted hay, and the acidic perfume of horse urine. Each breath makes your eyes water and your head swim. Beside you, old Hedrick coughs, hacking up phlegm stained with earth. He is past 60, or so he claims, yet still bound to corvée until his last breath. He gestures to a malformed clod with a trembling hand. "This blasted soil," he rasps, "wrenching our bones while the Lord feasts on pottage thick as blood." You nod, sharing his resentment, but fearing to speak too loudly. The reeve prowls the rows, his boots crunching on gravel. No idle conversation is permitted. Any whisper of mutiny could cost your life, or worse. The morning stretches on in a haze of bending, digging, and kneeling. Your back arches painfully with every thrust of the spade. Your knees burn where they press against the gravel. Your fingers, chapped and bleeding, leave smudges of red on the manure. A small crowd of starlings swoops overhead, their cries mocking in their freedom. At midday, the reeve blows a carved wooden horn. It echoes through the yard like a summons to the gallows. Without pause, you hand your spade to the reeve sergeant and gather around the edge of the yard for a cursed, blessed bread break. A single loaf, baked from last season's inferior rye, is cut into slivers, divided among 40 peasants. You receive a thin wedge, dry and crunchy, and swallow it with lukewarm water. No cheese, no meat, no sweet honey, just the barest sustenance to keep you alive for the afternoon's labor. The afternoon's work is no better. You are sent to repair the Lord's fish pond dam, an earthen embankment that holds water for carp and pike. You and a dozen others haul basketfuls of clay and sod, dumping them into cracks where leaks form. Each basket weighs more than you do. The loading, carrying, and dumping feel like a continuous torment. The sun beats down, reflecting off the pond's surface in a blinding glare. The water's edge is lined with reeds and mud, where leeches cling like living needles. You brush them away with a trembling hand, but at least the pond's fish will bring the Lord a feast, while you return empty-handed. By late afternoon, sweat mats your hair, and a rash of red welts has erupted on your arms, likely from contact with the pond water and its unknown bacteria. Your stomach twists and knots. Still, there is no rest. corvée must be completed in full or you risk a half year's extra work penalty. As the sun begins its descent, the reeve calls the tally. You line up once more, hands still stained and body aching. Each peasant steps forward, naming the tasks completed and the hours spent. A single discrepancy, a missing basket or a late arrival, and the reeve will mark you for discipline, a caning in the stocks, or a summary whipping behind the granary to set an example. You state your hours with a trembling voice, and the reeve nods curtly, crossing your name off his list. You stagger away from the manor yard, the gravel crunching beneath your feet. The fields you tilled and the orchards you weeded will yield the Lord's tables with fruits of your labor. But for you and your family, there is nothing but the empty promise of your own scratch plot at home. Before you can rest, however, another obligation looms: the church tithe. In the village churchyard, next to the crooked steeple, stands the parish priest, a gaunt man swathed in threadbare vestments. He watches from the church's doorway as peasants approach, carrying baskets of grain, eggs, or a few vegetables from their plots. The tithe demands 1/10 of everything: grain, livestock, honey, even the chickens your children raised. No excuse is acceptable, no loophole permitted. You lift your basket of beets, small and misshapen, and present it to the priest. He weighs them on a small scale, nods, and scoops one beet aside, another due for the church. The remainder is consigned to the poor box, a gesture of charity, they say, though the poor who receive it are seldom those who produced it. Next week, you must deliver ale and bread for the church's festival and repair the broken roof tiles over the nave. These pious demands follow you like a curse, imposed on your body and purse in equal measure. With church dues paid, you return home just as dusk blankets the sky in lavender and gold. Your wife waits at the cottage door, her face drawn with worry. She has spent the afternoon tending the vegetable patch, pulling weeds among your family's meager yield of onions, beans, and turnips, while watching your children. The patch yields little, the soil is thin, and wildlife from the nearby forest raids it nightly. You stagger inside and slump onto the bench beside the hearth. Gladys brings you a bowl of watery stew, barley, a few shriveled beans, and a single turnip torn into rough chunks. You look ill, she says, her voice low. The carding and the pruning. You must rest. But rest is a dream. Outside, the bell of the manor tolls for the Lord's evening meal, an event you cannot attend. Inside, the shadows lengthen, and you must still mend your children's hose, stoke the hearth fire, and patch the thatch's leaks before night truly falls. While Lattice sets a small pot of gruel to simmer, you gather your tools for tomorrow's obligations: a mattock for repairing the church's broken steps, a pair of gloves for hedging around the Lord's fields, and a small whetstone to sharpen Margaret's sickle before barley harvest begins. Each tool must be hidden securely. If the reeve discovers a missing tool among the family's possessions, he will claim it as payment for any deficiency in labor, another covert tax against your lineage. Night brings no escape. The thatch above you creaks as wind stirs, and every gust sends a flurry of straw down onto your pallet. Outside, the hoot of an owl reminds you that predators prowl just beyond the village boundaries: wolves, boars, and bandits seeking to prey on the unprotected. The manor's watch guards the roads, but only during daylight. In the dark, the forest and its dangers reclaim your world. You lie beside your daughter, Margaret, listening to her gentle breathing. Tomorrow, she will awaken to learn new tasks, possibly helping mend cloth at the manor's textile workshop, or serving as a scullery maid in the steward's kitchen. Each day she spends there yields a handful of pennies for your family, but you know her youth is being sold piece by piece to keep you alive. You pray again to St. Martin, patron of the poor, to St. Barbara, protector against sudden death from collapsing buildings, for strength to survive another day of bondage. Your prayer feels hollow, yet you cling to it. In this world, hope is as rare as clean water. As the village settles into a hush, broken only by the distant bleating of sheep and the hiss of the hearth, you realize that the cycle of obligations, the corvée, the tithes, the levies, will never end. You will grow old and die beholden, your children burdened by the same chains. Yet somewhere in the dark, a spark of defiance glimmers. The peasants whisper of rights won by those who survived the great mortality of the plague years past: more favorable rents, a little more freedom of movement, a chance to bargain. But such whispers must be spoken softly, or they, too, will be crushed. And so you close your eyes, preparing for the next dawn's summons, knowing that the Lord's fields will claim your sweat again, and the church's doors will demand their tithe once more. For you, there is no rest from servitude, only the endless grind of life born to serve. The mid-morning sun filters weakly through low-hanging clouds as you stand at the threshing barn's open doorway, breath steaming in the chill air. It is harvest time, supposedly the season of plenty, but for you, it is instead the grim reminder of last year's failed crop and the ever-present threat of famine. The manor's barn is stuffed to its rafters with grain from wealthier tenants' fields and the yields extracted from peasant strips. You, however, will receive only scraps once the Lord's stores are filled. You shoulder your flail, a heavy wooden staff with a swinging arm bound by leather, and step into the barn. The floor is littered with stalks of barley and wheat, chaff drifting like pale snow with each movement. A dozen men and women bend over their own areas of the threshing floor, swinging flails and practiced rhythms to separate grain from straw. You join them, the flails weight like a battle axe in your hands. With each strike, you taste grit on your tongue and feel the vibrations travel up your arms and into your shoulders. Your daughter Margaret works nearby, her hands already reddened by the rope that binds the flail's handle. You shout a gentle warning when she misses a beat and nearly loses grip, but the older hands chide you to let her learn. The barn steward, an officious fellow named Beringer, circulates among the threshers, stamping a rod on the timber floor to keep time. His green surcoat bears the Lord's emblem, and his sharp gaze catches shirking peasantry swiftly. Keep pace, he bellows to a young man who strikes falter, or you'll taste the lash. Famine's imprint is everywhere. Frail bodies whose ribs show through thin tunics, hollow cheeks streaked with dust and sweat, and eyes dulled by the memory of hunger. Even the grain you glean from the flails tastes faintly sour, a hint that stores of decent seed have long since been depleted. By midday, your arms ache violently, and your back feels as though it might snap under the strain. The steward calls a brief respite. Women withdraw to one corner for water, gray, tepid, and barely enough to cleanse the sweat from brows, while men lean against the barn's posts, breathing heavily. You take a small piece of barley bread from your pouch, ration for each laborer, and chew it slowly, marveling at its relative solidity compared to last season's crumbs. In the hushed lull, talk turns to the great hunger that stalks these lands. Crop failures 2 years ago, followed by heavy rains and a locust plague, have left the soil exhausted. The manor's granaries bulge with tithes extracted from the villages farther afield, but you and your kin have only the pittance of last year's lean yield to sustain you. By spring, many will have consumed every morsel. Then what? Starvation? Theft? Flight into the forest, where wolves and bandits lurk. Suddenly, a wail echoes from the barn's entrance. All heads snap toward the door as a gaunt figure is dragged inside by 2 bailiffs. It is Alisoun, a widow from the next hamlet. Rumor had said she begged alms on the highway. Rumor had said she stole a loaf of bread from a passing merchant's cart. Now she is accused of theft, a capital offense under the Lord's law. Her wrists are bound with rough cords, and her gray shift is torn from her shoulders. Beringer strides forward, rod raised. Alisoun, you stand accused of taking 1 loaf of rye bread from a safe, lawful merchant traveling our Lord's highways. How do you plead? Alisoun's eyes are sunken, her cheeks hollow. She raises a trembling hand. My children starve. I meant no harm. I begged. Silence. Beringer shouts. You will plead guilty or face the ordeal of water and iron. Your stomach twists. The ordeal of water involves dragging the accused into the village pond, dunking her repeatedly. If she sinks, thus accepting the water, she is deemed innocent. If she floats, rejected by the water, she is judged guilty and subject to branding, mutilation, or execution. The ordeal of iron involves carrying a red-hot iron bar over a short distance. If your hand heals cleanly, you are innocent. But you cannot afford healing bombs, and wounds fester in these conditions. Alisoun refuses to speak further. Bailiffs drag her toward the pond beyond the barn. A small crowd follows, mostly children and idle youths, cheering for the spectacle. You push through, heart pounding, to witness the ordeal. The pond's water is icy and murky from churned mud. Alisoun is lowered in, screaming as bubbles of air escape her mouth. She sinks, held under thrice, and finally released. She struggles to her feet, sopping and shivering. Beringer pronounces her water innocent, thus declared not guilty of theft. But the Lord's mercy is as hard as his law. She is branded on the cheek with a hot iron rod bearing the manor's crest and exiled from the village for 7 years. If even a single bailiff spots her within the manor boundaries again, she will be hanged. The crowd disperses, muttering. Alisoun stumbles away, her face marked forever as a criminal. You return to your flail, hands shaking. No one speaks of the hunger that drove her to theft. Poverty is no defense here. You resume threshing, each strike echoing like a tomb's lid slamming shut. By late afternoon, the barn's harvest is complete. Carts rumble in to haul the grain away. You, however, receive no reward, only permission to take home a single measure of chaff to be used as bedding. Such scraps are prized. You will mix them into your own seed for next season's planting, hoping the birds and rodents have not discovered your cache. Outside the barn, you spot the village herbalist, an old crone named Sybil. She tends a small garden of medicinal herbs by the church's ruin, the only fertile soil left dry enough to grow spring greens. She motions you over. Take these dandelion leaves, she says, pressing a handful into your hands. Cook them lightly in broth. They'll ease your hunger pangs and your liver's ache. You thank her, though your mind drifts to your own ill wife and children waiting at home. You know the gruel you feed them tomorrow will be laced with these bitter leaves, food only a starving man would chew. As dusk falls, you trudge home along a path skirted by skeletal trees and failing hedgerows. Your steps slow as fatigue doubles your weight. In the distance, the manor's lights glow bright and warm, an oasis of comfort beyond the locked gates. You inhale, tasting the smoky scent of another household's hearth. Once, you might have dreamed of stealing in, grasping at pot-roasted meat or a loaf of fresh bread. Now, you only tremble at the memory. At the cottage door, you find your wife seated on a low stool, cradling your youngest child, whose cheeks are sunken and limbs limp. Yosef, your son, stands beside her, a tear-streaked face reflecting fear. They have been watching for you since the first gloaming. Inside, the hearth's ashes have gone cold. You build a small fire from leftover kindling and cradle a tin cup of broth alit with Sybil's leaves. Your wife takes a sip and coughs. Its bitterness lingers, but she nods, grateful for warmth. No supper comes tonight. You have held back a small bowl of porridge for the children. A sudden knock at the door makes you start. You open it to find the steward's sergeant, a hulking man with a scowl fitting easily into the barn's shadows. He pushes his way inside, the door creaking in protest. Your family's dues, he growls. The manor requires 2 more hens and half a bushel of turnips by dawn. Or see your tools seized. Your blood runs cold. You do not have 2 hens, your last fledged weeks ago. The turnips barely cover what you need to feed your children for 2 days. Before you can respond, he slams the door and stalks off, leaving you and your family in stunned silence. Panic sets in. Without hens, you cannot pay the poultry tithe. Without turnips, you cannot eat. You weigh your options: steal from a neighbor, raid the forest for wild roots, or mortgage your last possession, Lattice's silver ring, a lone heirloom. None of these paths guarantees safety. You kneel beside your wife and children, head bowed. We must find a way, you whisper. I will go at first light and beg Sybil for more herbs, and perhaps at the gallows tree we can seek coins from alms. Your wife throws her arms around you, fear and exhaustion in her eyes. You press a kiss to her brow, tasting the tang of tears on her cheek. Your children cling to your legs. There is no easy answer, only the certainty that tomorrow's dawn will bring more suffering, more impossible demands, and the ever-present threat of punishment if you fail. That night, you lie awake on your straw pallet, haunted by Alisound's branded face, the taste of bitter broth, and the steward's demand echoing in your mind. Sleep offers no refuge. You know that famine and pestilence are not the only scourges of the Middle Ages. Punishment for poverty can be even harsher. When you finally drift into uneasy slumber, your dreams are of fields stripped bare, barns locked tight, and a noose swinging beneath a pale moon. The dawn will find you once more in shackles of obligation, life ebbing away one day at a time in a world where hope is as scarce as bread and mercy is reserved for the mighty. Dawn breaks over the village with a brittle chill, the sky swirled and pale gray. For the first time in years, you feel something unexpected stirring within you, not fear, but a cautious ember of defiance. Rumors spread through the manor's fields that labor demands have only grown harsher since the Great Plague years, even as the peasant population has shrunk. Wages have ticked upward in surrounding realms, and some serfs dare to demand better terms. Whispers of revolt drift among the hedgerows, quiet but persistent. You rise from your straw pallet, every muscle throbbing, and dress as the pale light filters through your cottage's cracks. Your wife, Lattice, stands at the hearth, her eyes meeting yours with a trace of hope. They met last night, she says in a hushed tone. By the old gallows tree, farmers from 3 manors, armed with pitchforks and hatchets. They say they will march on the steward's house today, to demand their rights. Your heart pounds. The steward's house, a short mile down the road, is a fortified timber hall, the locus of power and oppression. If peasants gather there, it will be a dangerous step. Yet you recall Alisound's branded cheek and the sergeant's threats. You nod, resolve hardening like frost. Tell me the plan. Outside, you join a covert gathering in the village's central hollow, where nearly 50 peasants have assembled: plowmen, weavers, brewers, and farmhands, men and women alike clutching farm tools sharpened into crude weapons. The eldest, a veteran named Rolf, stands atop a fallen log, eyes blazing. Today, Rolf intones, we demand the end of arbitrary corvée, a cap on tithes, and the right to renounce our serfdom after 40 days' service. We ask only what others have fought for and won, beyond our borders. If the steward refuses, we will burn his hall and free ourselves by force. A murmur ripples through the crowd. The tension between desperation and hope crackles in the morning air. You squeeze your mattock's handle, feeling its rough wood beneath your fingers. Across the hollow, Margaret stands beside you, cheeks flushed with fear and excitement. You catch her gaze and nod. She, too, believes change is possible. At mid-morning, the motley procession sets out, banners improvised from burlap sacks tied to stakes. Children trail behind, carrying water and bread. You march with a cautious determination, mindful of the whetted edge of your scythe. As you near the steward's hall, the slow, steady beat of your heart seems deafening. The manor's guards, half a dozen aging watchmen, spot the column and hastily draw spears. Their armor is rusted, their helms dinted. They form a flimsy line before the hall's entrance. Over a wooden railing, you glimpse the steward, Master Berenger, his green surcoat bright against the timber walls. He raises a hand, beckoning. Peasants, he calls, voice trembling, stand down. You riotous rabble, leave this place at once, or face the gallows. Rolf steps forward, raising a gloved hand. We come not to riot, but to parley. Our demands are simple. Relieve us of unjust burdens, and no harm need befall your steward. Berenger's hawkish eyes flick to the guards. They give no sign of lowering weapons. The tension escalates. A child at your side wails, and a woman grips your arm. You glance at Margaret. Her small face is pale. You steel yourself. Suddenly, a crossbow bolt whistles overhead, embedding itself in the hall's wooden doorframe. A watchman hollers, firing a reflex bolt back in panic. The quarrel misses everyone. Chaos erupts as both sides brandish weapons. You grip your scythe, heart pounding. A guard lunges at you with a spear. You sidestep, raise your blade, and thrust the shaft to his midsection, driving him back. Women behind you cheer, and some fling stones at the hall's windows. Others rush the gate, battering it with clubs. The air fills with shouts, the crack of wood splintering, and the sharp tang of fear. Inside, Berenger scrambles onto a barrel to address you once more. Mercy, mercy. If you desist, I'll grant you an audience with the Lord. His words hang in the air. It is a spark of hope or a ploy. You shout back, voice hoarse, bring him forth. Let us speak to the man who holds our lives in his hands. A moment's hush falls. The guards lower their spears slightly. Rolf signals for calm. Two peasants grab ropes and lash them to the gate's hinges, prying it open just enough. Berenger hurries down stone steps, clutching his staff. The crowd presses in as you step forward. Dust swirls, sunlight slants through the hall's open portal, painting everyone in a harsh glare. Berenger bows, eyes flicking nervously over the faces around him. Our terms, Rolf announces from the log again, are threefold. No more than 2 days of corvée per week, tithes capped at 1/10 of actual yield, not artificial quotas, and freedom to move or renounce serfdom after 40 days without penalty. Berenger's mouth works silently. Suddenly, the steward calls from within, his voice carrying an unexpected undertone of urgency. I will present these demands to my lord at once, he calls. Remain here under guard, and in 2 days' time, you shall receive his judgment. A cheer roars from the crowd. Some hug, others collapse in relief. You exchange a stunned look with Margaret. Has such a promise ever been honored? Rolf holds up a hand for silence. Until then, we remain here. Any betrayal, and we resume. The crowd settles, loosening pitchforks and scythes but not stowing them. The stewards raise water and bread from carried baskets, offering them to the assembled, an improvised truce feast. You sip muddy water from a wooden cup and nibble a stale loaf. It tastes sweeter than any pottage you've eaten. 2 days pass under tense calm. Peasants patrol around the hall, ensuring no reinforcements arrive. At dusk on the second day, a herald's horn sounds. A party emerges onto the hall steps. The lords Reeve, Berenger, and beside him, a mounted knight in polished mail. The knight raises a gauntlet. Peasants of Oakvale, he proclaims, my lord has heard your pleas. He grants that henceforth, corvée shall be limited to 2 days per week. Tithes will be assessed on true yield, and any serf may petition for his freedom after 40 days of service, pending payment of the traditional manumission fee. Further, Anyone found guilty of attempting theft for want shall be shown leniency under review by the manor court. A ripple of astonishment sweeps through the assembly. Horses whinny, the knight's banner flutters in the breeze. The lord himself is not present, but his authority shines through these concessions. Rolf steps forward, voice strong. We accept these terms, my lord's messenger. May our mutual bonds henceforth be governed by justice, not fear. The knight inclines his head. So it shall be recorded. Now disperse in peace, and may your fields yield bountifully. A great cheer rises. Peasants embrace one another. Some clap Margaret on the back in celebration. You feel your chest expand with a new sensation pride. After years of unrelenting hardship, a measure of fairness has been wrested from the Lord's grip. In the days that follow, the new regulations take effect. You labor only 2 days in domain fields. On the 3rd day, you return to mend fences on your own strip. Tithes fall in weight, leaving more grain for your own table. When the harvest ends, you petition for your freedom, paying a modest fee salvaged from careful savings. The steward, now visibly uneasy, processes the manumission with surprising swiftness. At mid-morning, a herald reads your certificate. You are free. No longer bound by serfdom, you may live and work where you choose. Your wife weeps tears of joy. Your children laugh and dance amid the hedgerows. Neighbors gather to witness the moment, silent testimony to the power of collective action. Yet freedom comes with risk. Without the Lord's protection, your family must guard your holdings from rival claimants, wolves, and the vagaries of market fluctuations. You trade labor on fair terms for a local smith in exchange for a new plowshare, and you barter eggs and herbs for a small loan of wheat seed. The bonds of community, once only a buffer against want, become your lifeline. Over the next year, you form a guild of freeholders, pooling resources to build a granary and negotiate better prices for ale and cloth. Margaret apprentices with the weaver, learning to spin flax into fine linen she can sell. Yosef helps the miller in exchange for grain shares. Lattice tends a communal herb garden, providing medicine to the village in return for spare vegetables. Your cottage, once a Waddle-and-Daub hovel, is rebuilt with stone from a nearby quarry. You replace the thatch roof with slate tiles salvaged from the steward's abandoned granary. You hang a simple sign above the door, Freedman's Hearth. Yet the memory of serfdom lingers. You recall the ache of Corvey's labor, the scars of starvation, and the branded face of Alisoun. These memories guide your new life. You advocate for relief funds for poor neighbors, resist any attempts to reinstate old dues, and mentor younger villagers in the art of petitioning the manor court. In time, your village of Oakvale becomes known as a place of relative prosperity and fair governance. Travelers speak of freeholders tilled fields gleaming green, a bustling market, and a stone hall where peasants and lords alike meet in council. But you remain grounded in your past. Each dusk, you kneel before a simple cross erected on the hilltop, offering gratitude for the grit of your fellow serfs whose courage sparked the revolt. You whisper a prayer that no one ever again be bound by the chains you cast off. Through famine, pestilence, and feudal oppression, you endured, and in the end, you seized your destiny. Your life's journey, born in servitude, finds its resolution not in the mercy of lords, but in the unity and resolve of common folk. The first light of dawn slips through the narrow slits of your family's cottage window, painting the simple wooden walls in pale gold. You stir on your straw-packed mattress, shoulders stiff from yesterday's chores, and pull the thin woolen blanket closer around your shoulders. Today is your 10th name day, though no one beyond your family takes notice. There will be no celebration, only the familiar rhythm of drawing water, tending the hearth, and milling grain. Your mother, Anwen, calls you from the kitchen. Gwenifar, water for the fire. You rise, limbs heavy, and tiptoe past your baby brother's cradle. His cries have become a familiar soundtrack to your mornings, a reminder that your place in the household is defined by service, not play. Outside your door, your older sister, Briallen, now 14, sits on a low stool, unwinding yarn spun the previous day. She too was once a child like you, but her transition to adolescence came with lessons in sewing, cooking, and bearing her father's expectations of a future wife. Your own childhood's end is looming. At any moment, your parents may negotiate your betrothal. You fetch water from the village well, wooden bucket splashing. Other girls your age are here, too. Ira, whose father is a minor knight, and Morwen, daughter of the miller. Their mothers chat in hushed tones. Has the constable's steward given you a date yet? We heard Lady Isolde seeks a match for her nephew. Their words flutter in your mind like startled sparrows. rumors you dare not repeat at home. By the time you return, the hearth's embers glow red beneath a kettle of thin gruel. You take your place on the rush-strewn floor, dipping your wooden spoon. The flavor is bland, boiled barley, a pinch of salt, and it does little to still your nerves. Your father, Daffod, enters, cloaked in a rough wool tunic and leather boots caked with mud from the fields. He regards you with the same pride he showed when you first spoke, first walked, first named your colors. But today, pride is edged with calculation. After the meager breakfast, he beckons you outside. The cold morning air bites your cheeks as you step into the yard. A small group waits. Your mother with a sturdy mare's bridle looped over her arm, the village priest with his carved oak crozier, and Sir Cadfael's steward, Master Reginald, a shrewd-eyed man in a dark doublet adorned with the constable's crest. Your heart thunders as the steward approaches. "Daffod," he says, voice soft yet firm. "Your daughter is of marriageable age." You shrink back, but your father places a gentle hand on your shoulder. "I have a proposition," Reginald continues. "Lord Cadfael's nephew, young William, seeks an alliance through marriage. The lad is 15, heir to a neighboring manor. A match would secure both your family's security and the steward's patronage." Your mother's face brightens at the prospect. Dowry demands met, protection granted, social standing elevated. Sir Cadfael's favor could mean a roof that never leaks, grain stored for winter, perhaps even a place of mild respect in the village. Still, the choice has nothing to do with you. Master Reginald turns his gaze to you, hands clasped. "Lady Gwenevere, will you consent to this union?" Your throat tightens. 15 winters is older than you can fathom. You have barely tasted youth's sweetness. Yet you dare not refuse. Your voice emerges in a whisper. "I will serve as you deem fit." The priest steps forward and pronounces a preliminary blessing. In that moment, your fate is sealed. Throughout the morning, you are measured for garments. A simple wool kirtle and linen shift embroidered with your family's emblem. A silver trout against a field of river blue. The village seamstress, Ellen, takes your chest and waist with practiced hands, muttering of proper modesty and posture lessons to come. You wince as the linen prickles your skin, but you remain silent. By midday, news of your betrothal spreads through the hamlet. Other children avoid your glance. Older girls peer from behind cloaks. Mothers nod curtly when they pass, some with envy, some with pity. You walk through the village green, holding a small sprig of rosemary pressed into your gown, an herb symbolizing remembrance, to be worn until the wedding. A hush follows you, for you are now more valuable than a handful of coins. You are a bridge between families, a promise of alliances. At home, the afternoon sun warms the yard as you rehearse your duties. Your mother instructs you in the management of linens, folding, washing, starching, and airing the family's best under sunlight, careful to prevent moth damage. You learn to treat sweat stains with ash and urine, to keep linens crisp for your future husband's table. Next, you fetch water again and grind grain on the hand mill, your fingertips already cramped and calloused. Your father shows you how to drive the plow team for one furrow. Though it is frowned upon for a girl to perform that labor, he insists you know the basics of agricultural management. He grips your hand as you guide the oxen's yoke, teaching you to read the soil's moisture by feel and to turn each furrow at an even depth. Under his stern gaze, you master the task in a lopsided fashion, but he nods in acceptance. "A lady must understand the land she inherits," he says. When dusk arrives, the village priest comes again, this time to instruct you in reading simple prayers and basic Latin phrases for the wedding ceremony. He kneels beside your mat and drills you in the words, "Dilige mihi," Amen. You repeat each syllable, tongue clumsy around unfamiliar vowel clusters. He corrects your posture, knees together, back straight, eyes fixed on the crucifix, and reminds you that piety and decorum are as essential as obedience. That night, as you drift into sleep, the reality of your impending marriage hums in your mind like distant bees. You wonder, will William be kind? Will he desire your company? Or will you be a stranger in a castle too large to comprehend? Will you bear his children or weary of his temper? Before you can fully grasp the depth of these questions, a cold wind sweeps through the cottage, rattling the unglazed window. You pull the blanket higher and whisper a prayer, not for deliverance, but for courage. In a few short weeks, you will set out from the only home you've known, dressed in bridal white, escorted by villagers who once watched you squeal at a frog or wrestle a lamb. Your childhood, filled with laughter and simple chores, is ending. Ahead lies the hearth of a stranger, the weight of expectations, and a lifetime bound by duty. The fate of a medieval woman is woven from her family's needs, her lord's designs, and society's rigid codes. As a girl, you have learned obedience. As a bride, you will learn resilience. For now, you close your eyes, feeling the straw beneath you and the steady rise and fall of your chest. You carry a small hope, soft as a dawn mist, that somewhere between the duties laid upon you, you might find a whisper of joy, a moment of agency, or the strength to endure. And so, at the threshold of womanhood, you stand chained by the hearth yet poised on the brink of change. The threads of your life have been set. Only time will reveal the pattern they form. The silver light of morning glints off dewdrops on the cottage thatch as you rise for the first time as a bride. Yesterday's spring wedding still plays in your mind. The villagers' cheers, the priest's blessing, the tremor in your hands as you slipped William's ring onto his finger. Yet today, the ceremony's glow gives way to new realities. You are no longer Guinevere the daughter. You are now Guinevere the wife, bound to duties that will shape every hour of your life. A new hearth, a new hierarchy. William's manor lies a half-day's journey east, a timber hall surrounded by peat bogs and gorse. You set out at dawn, clad in a gown of forest green wool over fine linen, the rosemary sprig pinned at your bodice. A small procession of kin and villagers leads you along the muddy track, bearing your trousseau, modest linen shifts, a woolen cloak, and simple carved wooden chests. Each step carries you further from your childhood home and closer to a life shaped by duty. Upon arrival, William greets you at the gate. He is tall and slender, with sandy hair and steady gray eyes. His smile is polite but reserved. He leads you into the great hall, where your new household stands assembled. The steward, the bailiffs, the cook, and several serving girls. Their eyes rest on you expectantly, looking for cues on how to address you, where to place your seat, and which tasks you will oversee. Already, the hierarchy is clear. You stand at its apex, but only just. Before the hearth, your mother-in-law, Lord Cadfael's wife, Lady Emmeline, awaits you. Her gown of dark velvet is trimmed in fur. Pearls glint at her throat. She inclines her head and offers you a small pouch of coins. For your use, she says in a soft voice. You accept with a curtsy, mindful that every gesture here is laden with meaning. Your dowry chest was expected. This allowance signals a measure of favor. Mistress of the chambers, your first duty is to learn the layout of the manor. The steward, Master Aldred, escorts you through a labyrinth of rooms. The solar where William studies, the buttery where ale is stored, the pantry piled with salted meats and dried fruits, and the weaving room where tapestries depict your family's arms alongside William's. Finally, he stops before a heavy oak door. This is your chamber, he says, pushing it open. The room is modest by noble standards. A four-poster bed draped with wool curtains, a small wooden desk, and a chest for your garments. A window overlooks the hall's courtyard, where chickens peck and pigs grunt. Sunlight streams onto a rush-strewn floor. It will be your private domain, but within its walls you are expected to maintain order, provide hospitality, and uphold the household's moral standard. Immediately, you set to work. You instruct the serving girls, humble peasant women turned manor staff, to sweep the floor, shake the rushes, and replace the moth-eaten furs with fresh blankets embroidered by Lady Emmeline's seamstresses. You oversee the laundering of your husband's linen, washing by hand, rinsing in cold spring water, and drying in the courtyard. The steward watches, approving your precise direction, a sign that you understand the delicate balance of authority and respect. The ritual of the meal. By midday, scarcity and plenty meat at the table. As wife, you preside at first course, a tureen of pottage scented with herbs from the kitchen garden, and then pass platters of roasted goose, deer venison, and freshly baked bread. You ensure the ale flows, but not overflows, guiding the cupbearer's hand as he fills William's silver goblet. Each portion and every pause in conversation falls under your subtle management. Too little food seems unkind, too much appears wasteful. Your role is to orchestrate hospitality as an act of stewardship, balancing generosity with prudence. After the meal, you retire with Lady Emmeline to the solar for tea, if Lady Emmeline allows such luxuries, and instruction. She teaches you to account for provisions, noting quantities of grain, oil, cheese, and meat in the daybook, and calculating the household's needs for the coming feast days. She shows you how to negotiate with merchants when they arrive bearing salt, figs, or cloth. In her measured voice, you learn that a lady's power lies not in brute strength, but in management of resources and social grace, prayer and piety. As the sun dips, you join the serving staff in the chapel for vespers. The chapel's simple stone walls echo with chant. Lamps of polished brass hang from iron chains. You kneel beside William and his mother, learning to follow the priest's Latin verses. Ave Maria, gratia plena. Your folded hands remind you that acceptance by God and man is crucial. Lady Emmeline whispers guidance. Maintain visible piety, charitable alms for the poor, prayer vigils for the Lord's health, and attendance at every Mass. A lady's moral authority is inseparable from her duty to the divine. The unending work of a wife. Retiring to your chamber, you find your own prayers awaiting you. Petitions for fertility, for household peace, for guidance in this new station. Once these solemn duties are complete, you settle accounts in a personal ledger, a small scrap of parchment where you tally coins spent on thread, candles, and small gifts for the serving staff. You realize that every act, purchasing a sack of grain or gifting a mug of ale, cements your standing and the loyalty of those you govern. Finally, you rest, if only briefly. Tomorrow's dawn will bring fresh tasks, inspecting livestock pens, training William's sister's daughters in basic embroidery when they visit, and organizing the feast for Michaelmas. Your life now unfurls as a tapestry of obligation, domestic management, social diplomacy, and spiritual stewardship. There will be no respite, for a wife's duty in the Middle Ages is to serve as the hearth's guardian, the household's manager, and the liaison between lord and peasant. Yet beneath the weight of these duties, you sense a burgeoning strength. In mastering the ledger, commanding respect, and stewarding resources for your people. The chains of hearth and home are heavy, but they are also the framework within which your agency may grow. In fulfilling your role, you discover the subtle power and influence that medieval wives could wield, often unseen, but essential to the manor's survival. The morning light finds you already awake, your belly swollen with your first child. You rise from the four-poster bed in your chamber, the wool curtains still heavy with last night's dew. A faint ache in your lower back reminds you that the babe's weight is no gentle thing. You dress in a loose linen shift, its fabric stained from weeks of wear, and slip into your slippers. Your hands rest for a moment on the window's wooden sill as you watch the household stir. Peasant women drawing water from the cistern, swineherds herding piglets in the yard, and William's apprentice polishing the courtyard's cobblestones. You make your way down the narrow corridor to the solar, where Lady Emmeline waits by the hearth with a cup of warm milk sweetened with honey. She places it in your hands wordlessly. You sip gratefully, the sweetness soothing the nausea that still grips you some mornings. As a wife, you have attended every household task alongside her, accounting for provisions, training the serving girls, overseeing the kitchen garden's planting. Yet now your days are shaped by new demands, nausea, exhaustion, and the nervous anticipation of childbirth. Each week, you visit Sybil the midwife. You descend stone steps into her cramped herb-walled cottage near the granary. She greets you with a knowing smile, her wizened face framed by wisps of gray hair. Without ceremony, she presses a poultice of raspberry leaves to your belly to ease cramps, and instructs you to drink a tea brewed from chamomile and pennyroyal to prepare your womb for labor. The bitter taste turns your tongue, but you swallow it dutifully. Sybil's cottage smells of vinegar, dried flowers, and old cloth. It is at once comforting and terrifying, a place where life and death intertwine. At home, you continue your duties as best you can. You supervise the baking of the daily bread, kneading dough until your arms tremble, and you help in the dairy, skimming cream from the morning's milk for churning. You instruct the nursemaid, Elin, in fine stitches to patch William's hose and your husband's linen shirts, teaching her how to conceal seams so that they won't tear at the slightest strain. Late afternoons, you retire to the garden's shade to rock in a carved wooden chair, pleasing the babe with gentle sways, while you read aloud from a small prayer book borrowed from the chapel, each verse both a comfort and an admonition. As the months pass, your condition grows more precarious. The sharp pains of round ligaments stretching become familiar companions. You writhe awake in the night as your back muscles spasm. William presses oil of lavender to your feet and massages them with care, but he knows not the depth of your fear. You smile at him, assuring him all is well, though inside you tremble at the thought of bringing new life into a world plagued by filth, famine, and disease. Finally, the hour arrives. You awaken before dawn, a trickle of warm fluid on the sheet beneath you. Elin rushes to fetch Sybil. You clutch the bedpost as the first waves of contraction crest through you, each one stealing your breath. Torches are lit in the chamber, beeswax candles that smoke and drip as they struggle against the chill. Sybil arrives, arms laden with bowls of hot water, swaddling cloths, and a small knife for cutting the cord. She lays out her tools on a table, a metal hook for aiding a difficult birth, a pot of herbal salve for cleansing, and a clean linen sheet for the mother's safety. The contractions intensify. You grip the arms of the bed as the pain builds to a crescendo. Tears stream down your cheeks, and you cry out, your voice echoing off the chamber walls. William stands at the foot of the bed, hand gripping the end post like a lifeline. He whispers prayers, though the words falter in his throat. Elin fans you with a cloth, and Sybil kneels by your side, guiding your breathing, offering sips of warm broth laced with powdered ginger to calm your stomach. Hours pass in a blur of agony. The midwife's gentle hands palpate your abdomen, assessing the babe's position. At one point, the baby's shoulder lodges against the pelvic bone, and Sybil's brow furrows. She fetches a red-hot iron ring and cauterizes a small tear in the perineum to release tension, an ordeal that makes you gasp through clenched teeth. Then, with a final, excruciating push, you feel the rush of relief as your child emerges, slimy and wailing. Sybil wraps the infant in linen and passes it to you. The babe's skin is mottled purple. Its cry rasps with breath's first labor. You cradle the tiny body against your chest, tears of pain giving way to tears of wonder and terror. The cord is cut and tied, and a poultice of comfrey is placed on the wound to staunch bleeding. Through your haze of exhaustion, you whisper blessings, marveling at the miracle even as a tremor of dread crawls through your spine. Mortality, both infant and mother, is never far away. In the days that follow, your chamber becomes a place of vigil. Elin stands watch while you nurse the babe, offering sips of cooled water when dehydration threatens. Sybil returns each morning, cleaning your stitches, changing the poultice, pressing a tincture of yarrow to your loins. Your hair spills from its ties, matted and damp. Your body aches in places you never knew could feel pain. You have lost nearly a stone in weight, your cheeks hollowed, and you long for the comfort of the nursery's daytime sun. Meanwhile, the manor's rhythms continue beyond the chamber door. William visits each afternoon, slipping coins into Elin's palm to care for your needs. The kitchen staff brings you small bowls of thin broth and soft bread, though you worry how the household will fare if resources are diverted to care for one child. In the great hall, the steward notifies you of dwindling butter stores and demands an account of the ale barrels. You glimpse Lady Emmeline weaving in the solar, her needle deft as ever, but her eyes betray concern. She knows the peril childbirth has posed for countless medieval women. By the end of the second week, you rise from your bed with aid. The midwife assists you as you place the babe in a cradle lined with straw, tucked beneath a woolen blanket. Your stitches have healed enough for minimal discomfort, though each movement reminds you that healing in a world without antiseptics is fraught with risk. You make a vow. You will guard this child with every ounce of your strength, teaching it resilience and compassion in a world that offers little kindness. As you resume light duties, checking the weaving room for moth damage, instructing Elin in linen care, and reviewing grain inventories, you feel a new force coursing through your veins. Motherhood has transformed you, binding your heart to another soul even as it has exposed your own vulnerability. Each errand beyond the nursery carries a concern. Is the babe warm enough? Has it fed? You find yourself glancing at doorways, imagining an unseen threat. be it a rat in the granary or a distant rumor of plague. When the babe is 2 months old, the household holds a christening feast. A traveling priest arrives, an ale-laden procession accompanies him, and peasant children tumble in the yard, watching the ceremony with wide eyes. You dress in your finest linen, the babe swaddled in a white shift embroidered with a silver fish, a symbol of faith and hope. The priest baptizes your child by tracing a cross with holy water on the forehead. As you watch the infant's solemn face, you feel a fragile pride, tempered by the knowledge that life in the Middle Ages is often as fleeting as a candle flame. In the months that follow, you nurse and soothe, teach Elin the art of wrapping each garment to encourage swaddling for better sleep, and draw from Sybil's teachings when the babe's belly aches or the slightest fever flares. You find strength in community. Peasant mothers gather in the kitchen to share brews of sage and fennel, exchanging lessons on lullabies and herbal poultices. Their solidarity buoys you on days when the babe will not cease its crying, when your milk seems to falter, or when the specter of illness haunts each cough. Yet motherhood is also a burden of endless labor, washing tiny shifts by hand in cold water, drying them on low-slung lines, grinding oats for porridge at every dawn, rousing yourself when the babe's cries pierce the night. William's visits grow shorter as the steward demands his presence at council, and you hide your loneliness behind careful smiles when he returns, offering a reassuring kiss before disappearing again into the manor's affairs. You endure the nights of fractured sleep, the days of aching arms, and the constant risk that the babe might succumb to fever or infection. But in the lull between each task, you sense a transformation, an unspoken power that motherhood bestows. Fierce protection, deep empathy, and the confidence to negotiate for more resources when needed. You plead with the steward for extra ale for the babe's fevers, reminding him that a healthy heir ensures the manor's future. He acquiesces, grudgingly, and you secure a small cask beyond the norm. By the time the babe reaches its first winter, you have found a rhythm: morning prayers, midday nursing, afternoon rest, and evening hearth gatherings with other mothers. You spin flax while rocking the cradle, your fingers nimble despite the toll of childbirth. You have discovered that a medieval woman's life, chained by hearth and hearth's demands, holds within it both misery and moments of transcendence. To birth and raise a child in this age is to confront mortality at every turn, yet also to affirm life in the face of overwhelming odds. And so you stand in your chamber doorway one crisp evening, the babe dozing in your arms, and watch the last light fade over the manor's roof. You whisper a prayer of gratitude for safe delivery, for the midwife's skill, for the solidarity of peasant mothers, and for your own survival. In your heart is woven the tapestry of motherhood's joys and sorrows, a testament to the resilience of medieval women who bore children, ran households, and carved out agency in a world that sought to confine them. You turn, rocking the babe gently, ready to face another day of dawn's demands, hearth's chores, and the enduring miracle of life. The sun has barely crept above the horizon when you first feel the hush that follows catastrophe. You rise in your chamber, shoulders stiff with grief and fatigue. Last night, William succumbed to a sudden fever, an infection from a minor wound that no leech or herbal salve could staunch. You found him still, pale in the lantern's glow, and held him until the final breath left his body. Now, the manor is strangely silent. The steward's staff tiptoes through empty corridors, the hounds in the courtyard no longer bay, and the cook's hearth fires smolder under gray ash. In the great hall you kneel beside William's bed, now stripped of pillows and tapestries, as Lady Emmeline arranges prayers for her son's soul. She is draped in a widow's veil of heavy black wool, the edges lined with coarse silk. You crouch beside her, veil pressed to your eyes, sharing the knowledge that widowhood brings both freedom and peril. As the last candle gutters, you rise and retreat with the steward to settle estate affairs. The steward, once your mentor, now becomes your judge and barrier. He spreads parchment before you, inventories of livestock, grain stores, and household goods. As widow and heir, he says, voice hollow, you may claim your dower rights, 1/3 of the estate's produce and revenues for your lifetime. You trace trembling fingers over the sums, 50 ewes, a measure of oats, rights to the east meadow. It is less than William received as heir, but it is more than many widows possess. Yet every privilege feels laced with suspicion. You sense the steward's calculating gaze, weighing how much power to grant you. Over the following days, you adjust to your new role. You dismiss the serving girls who once tended your chambers, replacing them with your own handmaids from your childhood village, women you trust. You walk the fields, issuing orders to bailiffs and shepherds, your voice quavering only at first. You learn the subtleties of rent collection from tenant farmers, bargaining for prompt payments, yet offering leniency in poor seasons. In the bakehouse, you instruct the cook to reserve the finest loaves for midday alms distribution, your first act of charity as a landowner. Yet each decision you make is scrutinized. At council meetings, the steward's hand hovers over the ledger, as though ready to override your decrees. When you order repairs to the manor's broken palisade after a winter storm, he grumbles that the cost is too high. You counter with quiet firmness. The safety of your tenants and household depends on strong defenses. He concedes, but you see in his eyes an impassive warning. Remember your place. As the months pass, the rhythms of the manor return. Spring planting, summer feasts, autumn harvest. Your child, now nearly 5, follows at your skirts, absorbing every whispered conversation. You struggle to balance maternal devotion with your duties. She learns to read simple letters from the chaplain as you tour the barley fields. She watches you weigh rents beneath the great oak in the courtyard. Sometimes she falls asleep clutching your skirts, and your heart aches at the knowledge that motherhood and rulership demand sacrifices neither role allows you to escape. Then, rumor slithers through the village like a serpent. The widow's crafts are unnatural. It begins with whispered accusations. Steward's men find a row of dried herbs hanging in your solar. A frightened maid claims she saw you stirring a copper cauldron late at night. Mothers hush their children when your child approaches. Tenants avoid your gaze when you pass. The charge hangs in the air, witchcraft. You steel yourself, knowing that a widow's independence often breeds envy. You gather your confidants, Sybil the midwife, the village priest, and your maternal uncle, the reeve of your birthplace. They attest to your piety, your healing remedies, your generosity to the poor. But superstition is a ravenous beast. A group of fearful tenants marches to the manor's gate, demanding you be tried by ordeal. In the courtyard, you stand before the old stone well, site of ordeals past. The steward paces like a caged wolf, the bailiffs flanking you with staves. The priest reads from the Gospel of St. John. If there be any wicked way in you, God will make it manifest. They insist on the trial by water, bound and cast into the well to see if you sink or float. You close your eyes and recall the baptism of your child, the river's cleansing flow. With measured steps, you climb to the well's edge. They bind your wrists and ankles with linen strips. Your eldest maid steps forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "My lady," she whispers, "trust the Lord." You nod, cloaked in prayer. A bailiff lowers you into the black water. The chill steals your breath as you submerge. Then you feel your arms slip free of the ropes, and you rise unbound. You clutch the well's edge and climb, dripping and shivering. The crowd gasps. You have been proclaimed innocent. But innocence in the eyes of God does not guarantee safety in the eyes of men. You are named the blessed widow rather than the witch, but the stain of suspicion lingers. You command the steward to record your survival as divine vindication. He does so reluctantly. Yet you know that to secure your family's legacy, you must wield power more deftly, now not only as a widow, but as a protector and moral exemplar. Over the next year, you strive to build goodwill. You establish a small infirmary beside the chapel, employing Sybil and the former cook as healers. You supply linen and ale to the sick, draw on your dower revenues to purchase spices for pestilence season. You host monthly alms dinners for the poorest serfs, plenty of pottage and ale, reminding them that generosity is the mark of true nobility. Slowly, distrust yields to cautious gratitude. Mothers bring orphaned infants for care, the blacksmith offers to shoe your child's pony for free, and the bailiffs lower their eyes when you speak. Still, the specter of danger never entirely abates. Across the river, a band of brigands prowls the roads, and you authorize a nightly watch, twice as many torches as the steward's men consider prudent. In council, you demand funds to repair the road itself, arguing that safe trade means greater revenues and fewer ambushes. The steward balks, but you prevail by promising a feast to celebrate its completion, a feast so lavish that the brigands themselves would envy the manor's abundance. Years pass, and your role transforms from vulnerable widow to respected lord of the manor. Your child grows into a poised youth, educated in the solar's study, learning the art of governance at your side. You teach her the prayers once drilled by Lady Emmeline, the ledger entries you once recorded, the harvest techniques you refined with the bailiff. One day, you climb the tower's spiral steps together and survey fields robed in golden grain. She grasps your hand and says, "Mother, when I marry, they will find me better prepared than you were." You smile, the first true smile in years, and kiss her forehead. In time, you arrange her betrothal to a kindly knight's son, securing an alliance that ensures the manor's future. You negotiate her dowry with a shrewdness born of your own trials, enough to grant her comfort, but not so much as to impoverish your treasury. At the contract signing, the steward looks on with approval. He addresses you now as Lady of the Manor, no longer the widow. You hear respect in his tone and realize that your hard-won authority has become undeniable. On the eve of your daughter's wedding, you stand in the great hall, dressed in deep blue velvet trimmed with silver thread, a widow's color that now speaks of dignity rather than despair. The halls are festooned with ivy and roses, and the air hums with music. As candles flicker and cups are raised, you catch sight of Sybil, the priest, the bailiffs, and even the steward, all celebrating your family's continuity. You feel a gentle warmth in your chest, the assurance that you have secured not only your daughter's future, but the survival of your line. In the quiet after midnight, you slip away to the tower's parapet. The moon bathes the fields and rooftops in silver light. You whisper a prayer of gratitude, to St. Bridget for your healing work, to St. Margaret for your child's safe birth, to God for guiding you through widowhood's trials. You recall the fear and suspicion that once threatened to drown you, and you smile at how faith, fortitude, and compassion have forged your destiny. As you descend the steps to your chamber, once draped in mourning, now awaiting a new spring, you carry the knowledge that a medieval woman's life could be bound by hearth and hardship, yet still blossom into sovereignty. You place your hand upon your daughter's empty cradle, now gifted to her by marriage, and you feel the weight of the years slide away. In the silence of the night, you rest at last, secure in the legacy you have built, a testament to endurance, wisdom, and the unbreakable chain that binds mother to child, widow to land, and woman to her own unyielding spirit. The dawn mist clings to the thatched roofs of the village as Tomas stumbles from his hovel, the chill air biting through his thin tunic. Only yesterday, he was a humble plowman, guiding his oxen through the furrows, his greatest worry the yield of barley and whether he could feed his young wife and newborn son. But in the night, the steward's horn sounded a call no peasant could ignore. Today, all able-bodied men between 16 and 50 must gather at the manor courtyard. The summons is backed by the Lord's oath to the king. Failure to appear is treason. Tomas grips the wooden yoke of his fields with one calloused hand and takes a deep breath. His neighbor, Jorek, falls in beside him. Jorek's broad shoulders fold with the weight of a leather jerkin and an iron helmet that clatters with every step. The helm was borrowed from the squire's armory, delivered with a haughty reminder that ill-fitting gear is still better than none. Neither man speaks as they pass rows of cottages whose occupants stand at their doors, wide-eyed and silent. Women clutch infants and elderly folk mutter prayers beneath bleary morning eyes. At the manor gate, a throng of peasants has already formed. Oxherds, blacksmiths' apprentices, fishermen whose nets have yet to dry, each man pressed into service by feudal law. A knight in chainmail sits astride a warhorse, spear upright and pennon snapping in the wind. Beside him stands the steward, a fat-faced man in green surcoat, listing the names of every man and boy required to serve. He ticks boxes on a parchment scroll. Any man unaccounted for is branded a deserter. Tomas presents his tally stick, the steward's clerk nods, and Tomas steps forward into the horror of war. They are herded into long lines. The knight addresses them, a brief speech promising glory in the king's cause, honor, and, if they survive, land grants or pardons for past crimes. His words ring hollow against the moans of the sick already slumped against the barn wall. For everyone who steps forward with hopeful chest and trembling chin, a dozen more shuffle in defeat. None of them have donned armor before, most have never held a sword. They carry farm implements pressed into martial service, scythes sharpened to pikes, pitchforks bound with cloth, crude shields fashioned from wagon wheels. Tomas receives a short, jagged blade, a half-sword, half-machete, its iron still rough with slag. He straps it to his belt, the leather biting his hip. A helmet 3 sizes too large is thrust upon his head. It tilts over his eyes, and he blinks, peering through a narrow slit. Beside him, Jorek wrestles with a breastplate that pinches his ribs. They exchange a grim nod. In a matter of hours, they will learn that steel is no panacea. By midday, the newly raised levy is instructed in the basics of formation. They line up in columns, the knight demonstrating how to kneel and brace a spear, how to lift a shield to deflect arrows. Training is brutal and swift. Any man who stumbles or balks is struck across the back with the blunt side of a sword, then told to rise or join the dead. Tomas's calves burn from endless kneeling. His arms ache from shouldering a pike heavier than any broom haft he's ever carried. The knight's voice booms. Obey your officers. Hold your line. You fight as one. But unity among men who yesterday tilled their own fields is as fleeting as the summer breeze. Food is handed out sparingly: black bread, a hunk of salted pork, and sour ale that tastes of vinegar. Tomas chews the bread mechanically, each bite reminding him of his wife's warm porridge back home. The pork rind is tough. He swallows only small pieces. There is no time for proper meals. Before the sun sets, they must be on the march. At dusk, the column files out of the manor gates. Torches flicker against the wooden palisade as the men trudge down the muddy road. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, bog water, and fear. Tomas stumbles over ruts and rocks, cursing under his breath when his helmet clinks against cobblestones. Jorek falls in step beside him, their shoulders nearly touching in the darkness. They carry nothing but the weapons and a small cloth pack, a spare tunic, a bit of cheese, a small leather purse with a handful of pennies. Their families wait at home, vulnerable without their protectors. They march for days. Rain soaks them through. Every step squelches in clay and animal waste. At night, they bivouac in fields strewn with thistles and cow dung. There are no tents, just a circle of shields and bodies pressed to the earth. Fires are forbidden, for fear of revealing their position to enemy scouts. Tomas lies awake, shivering, his back against Jorek's shield, listening to the moans of the wounded men sprawling around him. Lice crawl through his hair. Rats skitter beneath his knees, gnawing at leftover scraps. The pitted moon looks down like a watchful eye, indifferent to the misery below. On the 3rd day, disease visits the levy. A cough spreads through the ranks. A man in the center coughs, blood flecking his lips, and others soon follow. The quartermaster, an ill-tempered sergeant, orders the sick into a makeshift lazaret on the fringe of camp. They are given stale porridge and a bucket of water. No physician arrives, only a barber surgeon with rusty shears who offers to bleed them. Few dare risk it, knowing that bloodletting often leaves them weaker still. Soon the lazaret becomes a mass grave. The stench of decay drifts on the wind, mingling with the smoke of campfires. The levy presses on, but their numbers diminish. Each dawn, the steward's clerk jots new losses beside old names. Tomas sees men fall to fever, to exhaustion, to despair. Some simply lie down and refuse to rise, preferring death to forced servitude. Others try to desert under cover of darkness, only to be caught and decapitated as a warning. Their heads are fixed on spears at camp's edge, crowing like the cocks that once woke Tomas on his farm. Yet even as disease and death take their toll, morale frays under the weight of endless marching and broken promises. The knight, once proud, now rides a palfrey, limping and grim, his gilded helm absent. He no longer speaks of glory. His commands are curt. Tomas catches him once, staring at the columns of emaciated peasants and muttering, "By St. George, what have we wrought?" But there is no answer, no remedy. When at last they approach the rendezvous where mercenary companies join their banners, the levy meets seasoned soldiers equipped with mail hauberks, lances, and mounted on sturdy destriers. These mercenaries eye the peasant conscripts with contempt. Ragged clothes, flailing weapons, and blank stares betray their inexperience. They spit on the ground and mock the levies when they stumble. Tomas hears them grumble, "We'll carry your pikes for gold, but don't expect us to watch your backs." Even so, the levies fill the infantry ranks, their numbers crucial for shield walls and rearguard formations. No one explains what happens if the main army is defeated. Desertion is unthinkable, heads still line the spears. So they stand shoulder to shoulder with battle-hardened men, hoping that the steel in their hands, however rudimentary, and the length of their pikes will keep them alive. On the eve of battle, the camp is electric with fear. Drums pound in the distance. Priests wander among the levees, sprinkling holy water and reciting last rites. Tomas kneels beside his comrades, clutching a scrap of parchment bearing a hastily scrawled prayer to St. Michael. He kisses a tin cross and pops it into his tunic. His thoughts drift to his wife, feeding their son, to the smell of barley steaming in the cook's pot, to the simple life all but extinguished by this call to arms. When dawn breaks, the levy forms ranks at the edge of a misty field. Across the valley, enemy banners, wolves, lions, and stars flank a massed cavalry that glints in the sun. The knight raises his sword. The mercenaries bear their steel. Tomas grips his pike, knuckles white, and breathes in the chill air. In that moment, every peasant, trained for barely a day, knows that the summons to arms has shattered their lives before a blade is ever drawn. Fear and resolve mingle in their eyes. They march forward into a misery born of feudal oaths, desperate hopes, and the brutal reality that in medieval war, the call to arms is often the last summons a man will heed. Dawn finds the company breaking camp in near silence, the pale light revealing rows of soggy blankets, overturned cooking pots, and the bodies of men too weak or too wounded to rise. Tomas pushes himself to his feet, joints stiff from hours huddled beneath his cloak, and surveys the field. Broken wagons bogged in churned earth, tarpaulins flapping like wounded birds, and the damp morning air smelling of mold and old sweat. Around him, the levy forms into ragged columns, each man shouldering pack and pike, strapping on blistered sandals or laced leather boots chafing raw flesh. Before the sun climbs, they must cover 10 miles, muddy lanes cut through marshland and wooded ridges. Narrow paths force them into single file. Tomas steps into a puddle deeper than his knee, water pouring into his boot. He halts, cursing under his breath, as his neighbor Yerrick, a wiry herdsman whose cough rattles like dry bones, stumbles past. The muddied road stretches ahead, a thread leading into unknown danger. Rations are issued on the move. A crust of black bread, 2 spoonfuls of dried peas boiled into thin gruel, and a small cup of ale so sour Tomas can scarcely swallow it. It is barely enough to still the stomach. Already hunger gnaws at him. Worse, the peas taste of dust and manure, and a handful of barley husks drifts across the unsteady trench plowed by their boots. He shares his bread with Yerrick, whose feverish cheeks are hot to the touch. Yerrick returns it with a grateful nod, pressing the damp loaf into Tomas's hand for later. By midday, the column reaches a fallen-down abbey where they are to rest. The abbey walls, once whitewashed and cheerful, are now streaked with moss and crumbling mortar. Roof timbers have collapsed into a tangled heap. Inside the nave, dampness clings to the flagstones. A handful of carts laden with straw follow behind, offering a chance for a rare reprieve from the ground. Men scramble for bits of hay, fashioning crude piles to lie upon. Tomas snatches a handful, shaking out damp clumps, and lies propped against a shattered pillar. But the abbey is no sanctuary. Lice crawl through the straw, rats dart from shadow to shadow, skittering under blankets in search of crumbs. The price for shelter is foul air and the close proximity of the dying. Yerrick lies beside him, sweat beading on his brow as he coughs up a mouthful of blood. Tomas presses a scrap of linen to Jarek's mouth, refusing to abandon him. A passing sergeant, hair plastered with filth, glares at them both and orders weaker men to the abbey's back rooms, where they must wait for a wagon to carry them to the next lazaret. Some attempt to rise, most cannot. They slump again, resigned to fever's embrace. As the sun dips low, they must remarch. The carts with straw stay behind. Those left in the abbey are forgotten until the vultures arrive. Tomas hems Jarek's tunic beneath his cloak, binding his neighbor's arm to his own shoulders, and hoists him upright. 2 others flank him, and together they rejoin the column, stumbling down the path as the leader's horn sounds. Night falls with sudden blackness. Without torches or fires, both risks for revealing their position, the march is lit only by a crescent moon. Tomas keeps his hand on Jarek's shoulder, guiding him between trees whose branches scrape like skeletal fingers overhead. At one point, the column veers too close to a marsh, and a man named Peter steps into hidden mire. He sinks waist deep, cries out, and is dragged free only by the combined strength of 3 comrades, his boots and hose lost forever. His bare legs are whipped by brambles until he collapses, crying out in pain. By dawn, his wound will be festering. By noon, he may be gone. They at last reach a meadow ringed by palisades and trash fires, this night's encampment. The officers have spared no space for comfort, tents crammed together, leaving only narrow lanes. Each tent is a coffin in waiting. Tomas and Yerrick collapse beside a dying fire, their damp cloaks offering little warmth. A small kettle of water hangs over the embers, but the quartermaster has no fuel left to boil it. The men dip hands in the tepid water and wash faces, hoping to drive away lice and the grime of the march. Jarek's fever flickers and returns. He shivers violently. Tomas tears his own cloak to fashion a bandage around his friend's head, desperate to offer relief he does not possess. Morning brings worse news. A scouting party has been ambushed at daybreak. Word spreads that enemy skirmishers lie in wait along their route, picking off stragglers and lighting fires to block the road. A handful of men, peasants who once hauled carts for market, have taken up bows, firing at unseen enemies beyond hedgerows. Tomas watches as one stray arrow pierces a man's neck. He collapses without a sound, falling face first into wet grass. No one rushes to him. Bullets and pikes demand their attention elsewhere. The decision is made to detour along a narrower path paralleling a steep ridge. It offers cover but forces the column through dense brush. Tomas leads Jarek and another wounded man, Gunter, through the tangle of branches. His leg catches on a root, sending him sprawling into a patch of nettles. Pain flares, but he rises and presses on, driven by the fear of leaving Jarek alone. The three of them emerge onto a ridge overlooking a valley filled with swirling mist and smoke rising from charred huts. The retreating light reveals the aftermath of a raid. Fields set ablaze, livestock carcasses strewn in the fields. A half-starved dog slinks among the ashes, sniffing for scraps. Tomas's stomach churns at the smell of burning grain. He steels himself and pushes onward. Even in war's chaos, camp followers, women and children trailing behind, rush in between the soldiers, carrying water jugs and bundles of bread. They dart forward, brazen in their desperation, only to be driven back by barking hounds and yells. One girl, no older than 12, slips under the wagons in search of fallen potatoes. When she is discovered, a mercenary drags her out by the hair and beats her, leaving her sobbing in the dirt until a passing knight interferes on her behalf. By mid-afternoon, the column reaches a small village designated as the next camp. Homes are half collapsed from earlier skirmishes. No one remains. Doors hang open. Pots and pans lie scattered. The men go in to scavenge. Stale bread, rotting cheese, a few withered turnips. Tomas finds a pitcher of sour cider and takes a long pull. It turns his stomach, but it is better than the meager gruel they carry. He shares a slug with Jarek, who coughs through it and declares it sweet enough to die by. As twilight deepens, they are ordered to form a defensive perimeter. Stakes are driven into the ground, ropes strung between them. Sentinel watches are posted, 2 at a time, for every 100 men. Tomas volunteers. He wants to be on guard, rather than lying helpless. He patrols the perimeter with Gunter, whose leg wound is weeping and attracts flies. The two men whisper as they walk, talk of home, of families waiting, of ransoms promised if they survive. Gunter fingers the leather purse at his belt, the only thing he brought from home, and hopes it will buy mercy if he is captured. At the breaking of dawn, they wake to distant horns and the smell of smoke. Enemy cavalry has circled the camp under cover of night, setting fire to thatch roofs and barns. Flames roar as the defenders scramble to defend the wagons and tents. Tomas rushes back inside the palisade only to see the wagons ablaze. His pack, the spare tunic, even his few pennies are lost to the flames. Panic grips the camp. Men fight over scraps of bread thrown into the field by panicked women. Chaos reigns. Tomas grips his pike and stands at the palisade, watching as mercenaries and peasants alike form makeshift lines to drive off the raiders. The clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, the thunder of hooves echo across the village green. In the melee, Jarek is cut down, a sword cleaving through his shoulder. He collapses at Tomas's feet. Tomas wades into the fight, slashing at a rider whose mount crosses his path, but the odds are against him. When he finally reaches Jarek, raiders have moved on. Only embers and bodies remain. Jarek lies crumpled, blood pooling beneath him. Tomas presses a cloth to the wound, but he knows it is futile without a surgeon. Word comes that they must abandon the village and fall back to the main camp. Survivors gather what they can and retreat under a flag of truce agreed by both sides for the wounded. Tomas carries Jarek on his back, staggering through smoke and ruin. The sky is ash gray, the air tastes of charcoal. When they at last reach the main camp, Gunter and a handful of others help Tomas lower Jarek to a cart. The quartermaster orders that Jarek be left behind to die. There are too many wounded and too few resources. Tomas pleads, offering his own share of rations, but the order stands. A guard raises his spear. Tomas curses him and rushes forward, but is dragged away by 2 mercenaries, kicking and screaming. Left alone in the dust of the village road, Tomas watches the cart pull away with Jarek's blood-stained coat flapping in the wind. Rage and despair swirl in his gut. He falls to his knees, clutching at the earth, and weeps for his friend, for the plundered village, for the futile march that has brought nothing but suffering. The order rings out to remarch. Tomas rises, abandoning his grief. He reclaims his pike from where it lay in the dirt, straps on his helmet that has long ago lost its lining, and steps forward. Around him, the survivors move with hollow eyes. They trudge onward, past smoking huts and broken bodies, ever deeper into misery. Each step brings them closer to the next encampment, and to the grim certainty that in this war, the greatest enemy is not the man across the shield wall, but the cruelty of forced marches and huddled nights in camps where death waits in every shadow. The dawn mist lifts slowly from the battlefield, revealing a carpet of broken bodies, discarded weapons, and the lingering smoke of early volleys. Tomas, his face smudged with grime and blood, tightens his grip on his pike as he steps forward into the chaos. Just hours ago he stood in neat ranks. Now the shield wall is shattered, leaving soldiers sprawled in tangled heaps. The clang of steel and the screams of the wounded fill the air, a symphony of suffering. A cavalry charge came like thunder, horses in gleaming armor trampling the untested peasants before they could brace their pikes. Tomas recalls the moment a Destrio crashed through the line beside him, its rider's lance driving straight into Jorek's chest. Jorek fell with a hollow thud. No comrade could pry the pike from the knight's grasp. Tomas lunged with his blade, slashing at the horse's flank, but the beast galloped off, leaving grief and gore behind. Now, dismounted knights hack at any man who still stands. Their heavy axes bite through leather and flesh alike, sending men to their knees in a single blow. Tomas ducks beneath a raised sword, narrowly avoiding its silver arc, and thrusts his pike upward into the knight's thigh gap. The man howls, loosening his grip. Tomas spins the pike free and crashes it down into the knight's throat. Warm blood sprays across Tomas's tunic, and he staggers back, heart pounding, as the knight slumps in a heap. Every advance brings new horror. Where the shield wall once held, there are only broken shields, splintered wood and bent iron, and the ground slick with muddy blood. Tomas spots a foot soldier crawling toward a fallen bough and knocks an arrow, but a heavy mace hammers into his side, sending him crashing. He rolls, coughing up dust and blood, and sees his attacker's war club raised. He brings the pikes, but to the man's wrist, it snaps the bone with a crack like splitting logs. The mace clatters to the ground, and Tomas scrambles to his feet, gasping for breath. Amid the slaughter, cries for the wounded rise to a fever pitch. A handful of barber surgeons flit between men, their basins and razors in hand. One kneels beside a comrade whose arm has been severed at the elbow. With grim efficiency, he wraps the stump in linen and compresses a poultice of comfrey and vinegar into the wound. The man screams, blood welling through the bandage, but the surgeon offers little comfort. There are no field hospitals, only the surgeon's cart, parked just beyond the mortal edge, its wheels slick with gore. Tomas staggers toward a shallow depression where dozens of men have fallen. He pauses at the edge, stomach twisting, and pulls a limp figure into the grass. It is Gunter, his face pale as the mud beneath him. His leg has been shattered by an axe, the bone protruding through torn hose. Gunter's eyes flicker as Tomas cradles his head. "Help me, please," he whispers. Tomas tears a strip from his own tunic and fashions a tourniquet above the wound. He presses herbal salve into Gunter's mouth to ease the pain and holds his hand. Gunter's breathing slows, sweat beads on his brow. Tomas wants to stay, to see if the surgeon will stop by, but a wave of enemy foot soldiers sweeps nearer. Gripping Gunter's shoulder, Tomas whispers, "Live, brother. Live for them." He seconds later staggers away, leaving Gunter to fate beneath a swirl of dust and steel. A shrill whistle interrupts the carnage, a signal for archers to loose their shafts. Tomas finds cover behind a fallen standard and watches arrows zip across the field, embedding themselves in bodies or splintering shields. Many that fly too low skewer the unarmored. A peasant's head jerks back, neck broken. A knight's armor deflects the shaft, but he grimaces as it pierces leather in his side. He collapses, sword tumbling from slack fingers. A group of women, camp followers who have trailed the army to cook and launder, appear at the fringe of battle, carrying jugs of water and small bags of bread. They approach the wounded with guarded steps, their skirts stained by blood and mud. One kneels beside a moaning hobnailed boo-boy, offering sips of water. Another lifts a fallen man's helm and washes his face with cloth. A third pulls a half-frozen bit of bread from her apron and breaks it over the skull of a downed soldier. Their compassion is fierce, Yet each knows their mercy could earn them spears from those still fighting. They work quickly, slipping away before the combatants notice. Tomas realigns his pike with the survivors, a dwindled dozen now forming a semicircle against fresh enemy infantry. Their faces are set, hollowed by exhaustion. One of them, Rolf, a veteran of the Blackwater skirmishes, raises his voice. "Stand firm, lads. Make this final stand for home." They answer with hoarse cheers, but the torrent of enemy swords and axes does not waver. The final clash is a blur of steel and bone. Tomas deflects a mace blow, only to feel his helm dinted inward, stars dancing before his eyes. He staggers, and the man behind him goes down with a cry. In that moment of grief and rage, he grabs a fallen glaive from the dirt, its broad blade still keen. He swings in a wild arc, severing an arm and sending the ragged stump flying. The soldier howls, pain etched deep as he collapses. Tomas's chest heaves. He brandishes the glaive high. Suddenly, a horn sounds, a signal of retreat. The surviving enemy blades part, and a shrill voice calls. They break. Pursue not. Regroup. Confusion ripples through the field. Tomas scans the horizon. A plume of smoke rises where the enemy's main camp burns, set aflame by their own sappers. Command shifts to defense, and the battered levy falls back, dragging wounded and dead in their wake. Tomas helps an injured knight, Sir Allard, onto a makeshift litter fashioned from a shield and 2 pikes. Sir Allard's thigh is pierced. Blood soaks through his hose. "Thank you, peasant," he gasps. Tomas nods, cheeks wet with sweat and grief. They trudge toward the field's edge, where surgeons' carts wait. A small group forms a protective cordon, beating back stragglers eager for looting. The retreat is perilous. Enemy cavalry still roams the far ridge, and stray arrows skim the flanks. Tomas grabs a bow, one left behind by a fleeing archer, and takes aim at a horseman chasing a wounded page. His shot rips through the rider's shoulder, and the man yawns backward, lancing the horse's neck. Both rider and mount collapse. Tomas drops the bow, planting his pike in the grass like a stake. At the carts, the barber surgeons work furiously. They cut away shattered limbs, cauterize wounds, and bind gashes with linen. Some amputations are performed without poultice or prior ritual. Men howl as hot iron sear their flesh. Tomas watches as one thicker iron ignites the air with steam and smoke, then clamps the arteries shut. He realizes this is the only mercy possible now, better quick cauterization than slow death by infection. When his turn comes, Tomas kneels and lifts his leg. The surgeon inspects a deep gash that reveals muscle and tendon. "Lucky that blade missed the bone," he mutters, then makes a swift incision to drain pooled blood. He wraps a coarse bandage around the wound. Tomas tastes bitter iron on his tongue and swallows. His leg trembles, but he stands. They are loaded onto a wagon bound for the nearest stronghold, wheels clattering over broken pikes and splintered shields. The groans of the wounded fill the enclosed space, mingling with the low moan of horses pulling the cart. Tomas lies on a pile of straw, pressure on his wound making him dizzy. He stares at the sky through a gap in the cart slats, watching clouds drift as if indifferent to human misery. Behind them, the battle continues, pursuit of stragglers, looting of fallen camps, fires set to tents. Tomas thinks of his home, the thatched cottage, the fields awaiting plowing, the smell of fresh bread. He wonders how many of his levy comrades will return, how many homes will stand empty, how many wives and children will wait in vain. The wagon jolts to a halt at the gates of a battered keep. The wounded are dismounted and carried inside on stretchers. Tomas steps down, treads unsteady, and looks back at the blood-soaked field. A column of bodies, rotting and ravaged by scavengers, lines the way. He closes his eyes and breathes in a prayer for the fallen. Inside the keep, warmth and light contrast shockingly with the battlefield's gloom. A hearth fire burns low, and a hospitaller in black and white tending to a cradle offers him a cup of thick gruel. Tomas drinks gratefully, each spoonful warming his chest and clearing his mind. The hospitaller nods in understanding. His eyes know the price of war. As night falls, Tomas lies on a straw pallet in a dimly lit chamber, the scratch of rats in the corners a constant reminder that even here, death lingers. He presses his hand against the bandaged wound, feeling the pulse of life still strong. He closes his eyes and lets sleep claim him, praying that when dawn comes, the war's carnage will recede like a terrible dream, and that the fields of home will beckon him back to a life of peace. The camp is still as dawn breaks, broken only by distant groans and the drip of blood from fresh bandages. Tomas huddles beneath a rough blanket, his legs still raw beneath the coarse linen. Around him lie the battered remnants of the levy, some coughing up dark flecks of blood, others delirious with fever or pain. A stench of decay clings to the air, and each breath he takes tastes of iron and rot. A herald's horn calls all able-bodied men to muster. Tomas grips his crutch and swings his wounded leg over the pallet's edge. Pain lances through him, but he forces himself upright. Outside the cabin, the steward's clerk reads a new proclamation. The army will remain here for 3 days to ransom prisoners, forage for supplies, and repair siege works at the nearby town. Any man found absent will forfeit his share of the spoils and risk summary execution, ransoms, and looting. Tomas limps toward the town gates, where a line of hobbled prisoners stands shackled together by iron collars. Among them are knights in tattered surcoats, crossbowmen in brittle leather jerkins, and common soldiers whose faces are streaked with blood and tears. A late-arriving merchant has been pressed into service as interpreter and scrivener. He calls out names one by one: the merchant Corvin of Metz, the squire Aldolf of Brabant, the crossbowman Pietro from Genoa. Each must pay a ransom, often a year's income for a night, or the price of a horse for a mercenary, to secure a safe return. Ransoms are negotiated under the Lord's seal. Tomas watches as silver coins clang into leather purses, each handful widening the commissary's grin. If a captive cannot pay, his slave or wife may be confiscated or his land seized by writ. Some fortunate prisoners are freed when their lords send carriers with chests of gold. Others languish under guard, waiting for relief that may never come. After the ransoms, the camp is given leave to pillage. Soldiers and peasants alike spill into the town's shattered streets. Tomas shuffles after a small group of foragers, each man carrying a sword in one hand and a sack in the other. They strip the storerooms of salted herring and barrels of ale, pry nails from beams to burn in cook fires, and pry silver chalices from the church's altar. They claim coats of mail left behind, leaving empty racks and bent swords in their place. Tomas finds a small chest beneath the rubble of a burgess's home. Inside, 2 leather purses bulge with coins, favors he knows he can trade for black market cloth and spices when he returns. He stuffs one purse into his belt and hides the other beneath a loose floorboard in his shelter. He tells himself the money is for his family, his wife and son, left trembling at home as he marched off into war. Yet even as he pockets the coins, a pang of guilt tugs at him, that family's home will rebuild on their own spoils. Fields unharvested, families bereft. Back at camp, Tomas hears rumors that not all estates will fare as poorly as the merchant's house he looted. More remote villages, those that paid protection money or offered levies to the army beforehand, find their fields spared. But here, this contested county had been fought over for weeks. Crops lie trampled, barn doors ripped off their hinges, granaries smashed to splinters. In one field, Tomas stumbles over the bodies of 2 children, no older than his own boy at home, lying face down among flattened wheat. Their parents had tried to harvest under cover of night, scavenging a few stalks to feed their starving kin. Tomas covers his mouth against a wave of nausea, imagining the grief that must have followed when the children did not return to the cottage. He wishes, in that moment, that the king's tax collectors had been the greater threat. At least they left the earth intact. The march home and the specter of plague. After 3 days of ransoms and foraging, the army finally breaks camp. Tomas, though still injured, joins the column, each man burdened with loot and the weight of what they have done. As they march, a new dread seeps through the ranks. The pestilence of war, men call it, carried by rats on supply wagons and by lice burrowed into cloaks. Within days, the first fevers strike home. A young archer named Renard collapses beside the road, his face flushed and eyes rolling. He spits coughed-up phlegm into the dust, his breath rattling like dry leaves. Surgeons bind him, but they have no time for cures. They move on, leaving him to the county infirmary, if he reaches it alive. Tomas feels a chill beneath his wounds, and a bead of sweat trickles down his temple. He swallows fear and presses on, haunted by the memory of the fever huts at the abbey, where bodies lay festering in straw. Everywhere the army goes, plague follows, the foul companionship of war, born of filth and desperation. Victory's hollow end. Finally, after weeks of marching and skirmishing, the army stands before its prize, a battered frontier castle, its walls pocked with siege damage. The garrison surrenders at dawn, and the banners of the king are raised above the keep. A cheer goes up, but it rings hollow as Tomas watches the defenders, many of them peasants like himself, led out to serve as laborers repairing walls and burying the dead. Inside the castle's halls, the victors hold a feast: roasted boar, roasted fowl, hunks of cheese, and barrels of wine. The steward calls Tomas forward and proffers a simple wooden cup. Tomas sips the wine, its tannic bitterness matching his mood. Around him, knights boast of valor and heralds recount how the king's banner never fell. Yet Tomas knows the truth. Victory is measured not by banners, but by the fields that go unharvested, the children orphaned, the families broken, and the plague that spreads in the wake of marching boots. Return to an altered world. When at last Tomas is granted leave to return home, he rides with a small escort through villages that look unfamiliar. His own fields lie untended, the plow sits rusted on the furrows, the hedges have grown unruly, the barn roof has caved under winter's snows. His wife greets him at the gate, her face gaunt and lined with worry. Their son, now a year older, clings to her skirts. Tomas kneels and embraces them, breathing in the scent of hearth smoke. He carries his 2 purses, one he gives to his wife for seed and repairs, the other he buries beneath the barn's floor, a secret against lean times. He vows to rebuild, to sow and reap, to heal the scars of war on body and earth. But he knows the true cost of the call to arms. Fields still unplanted, the plague lurks in hidden corners, and the specter of war will call his name again when the king demands. Victory may bring glory to nobles and wealth to merchants, but for men like Tomas, it brings only the memory of marching into misery and the knowledge that peace, once broken by the trumpet's blast, is never easily restored.